My name is Ava. I am 34 years old. I manage a hematology lab at a regional hospital in San Diego. 4 years ago, I was lying in a hospital recovery room after emergency surgery. I was heavily medicated and barely able to keep my eyes open. I thought my parents and my sister were at my bedside to support me. What I did not know was that while I was drifting in and out of consciousness, they were using my social security number to forge my signature on a $40,000 line of credit. I spent the next 4 years saving every spare dollar for a down payment on a small condo. Then I sat in a mortgage lender's office and watched the loan officer pull up my credit report. She got very quiet. She turned the monitor toward me. There was my name attached to a defaulted debt I knew nothing about. The billing address was my parents' house in Orange County. I did not scream. I did not call them to demand answers. I asked for a printed copy of the report, folded it into thirds, and began a process that would systematically dismantle my family. Before I tell you what I did next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. The keyboard stopped clicking at exactly 10:14 on a Thursday morning. The loan officer's name was Diane. She sat across from me in a glass-walled office just off the interstate. The carpet was beige. The walls were a slightly different beige. The air conditioning hummed with the steady drone of a commercial lease. For 4 years, I had built my credit score to a 780. I built it the way a person builds a brick wall, one careful and measured deposit at a time. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. I packed my lunch in plastic containers. I worked overtime on weekends processing blood samples just to add a few $100s to my savings account each month. I was there to sign the final pre-approval for a 2-bedroom condo in Hillcrest. It had a south-facing window. I had already picked out the shade of white for the kitchen cabinets. It was supposed to be the finish line. Diane had been typing with the rapid rhythm of someone processing a clean file. Then the rhythm broke. She scrolled down. She stopped. She scrolled back up. Her face did the specific, careful thing a professional's face does when they uncover a ruin on their screen. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. She did not look at me right away. She moved her mouse in a slow, deliberate circle. "Ava," she said. Her voice had dropped a register. "Are you currently in dispute regarding the personal line of credit?" I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I do not have a line of credit, Diane, just the auto loan and the primary visa. We verified those last week." She turned the monitor toward me. The screen was filled with rows of black text. One row was highlighted in a bright synthetic yellow. It was a personal line of credit. Originated 4 years ago. The original balance was $40,000. It was currently 90 days past due. The name attached to the debt was mine, my full legal name. The social security number was mine. The address listed for the monthly statements was not mine. It was a house on a quiet street in Orange County. It was my parents' house. I read the yellow line. I read it again. I did not blink. In my family, there were 2 daughters. My older sister Lauren was the weather. She was the storms and the sudden droughts. She was the emergencies that required all hands on deck. Lauren always needed a loan for a new business idea that never materialized. Lauren always needed help covering her rent because her husband Derek was between jobs. I was the foundation. I was the one expected to quietly endure the weather without cracking. You do not check on the foundation. You just assume it will hold. I looked at Diane. She was waiting for the tears or the panic or the sudden sharp denial people offer when they realize they are bleeding. I did not give her any of those things. "Could you print that page for me?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Someone older. Diane hesitated. She clicked her mouse. The printer in the corner engaged and pulled a single sheet of paper through its rollers. She handed it to me across the desk. The paper was warm. I folded it once lengthwise. Then I folded it into a square. I pressed the creases sharp with my thumbnail. I placed it inside my purse, right next to my car keys. "I will need to pause the application," I said. "Ava, if this is identity theft, you need to freeze your credit today. Right now." "I know." I stood up. I thanked her for her time. I walked out of the glass office across the beige carpet and out the front doors into the blinding Southern California sun. I got into my car. I closed the door. The interior smelled like old coffee and the vanilla air freshener I kept in the vent. I rested my hands on the steering wheel. The leather was hot against my palms. My phone was in my purse, resting against the folded paper. I could have pulled it out. I could have dialed my mother, Patricia. I could have asked a question that would start a war. I did not pull it out. I put the car in drive. I merged onto the highway. The route to my apartment was 22 miles. I drove the speed limit. I turned the radio off. I counted the highway exits. There were 14 of them. I counted every single one. When I got home, I set my keys on the counter. I took the folded paper out of my purse and laid it flat on the kitchen island. I smoothed out the creases with the heel of my hand. I went to the refrigerator and poured a glass of cold water. I drank it slowly. I looked at the origination date on the loan. October 12th, 4 years ago. I manage a hematology lab. My entire job is looking at blood samples under a microscope to find anomalies. I look for the cells that do not belong. I watch how plasma separates in a centrifuge. In the lab, we do not guess. We verify. If a red blood cell count is low, we look for the bleed. I am trained to spot things that are hiding. I looked at the date on the paper, and the anomaly presented itself with perfect clarity. October 12th was the exact day I was admitted to the hospital for emergency gallbladder surgery. I had spent that entire week heavily sedated on narcotic painkillers. I had spent my recovery in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house in Orange County. I remembered that week in scattered fragments. My mother, Patricia, had brought me chicken broth on a tray. My father, Thomas, had adjusted my pillows and told me to rest. My sister, Lauren, had sat at the edge of my bed and held my hand while I slept. I had felt so lucky to have them taking care of me. They had been in my room. My wallet had been in my purse on the dresser. My social security card was tucked in the back zipper pocket. The loan was originated on a Tuesday. I had been unconscious on that Tuesday. I did not throw my glass against the wall. I did not scream into a pillow. The body is wiser than we are about which feeling to send first. It sent a quiet coldness that settled right behind my ribs. I sat at my kitchen island and traced the path of the fraud in my mind. A $40,000 line of credit requires an application. It requires a signature. It requires an address for the billing statements to be mailed. The statements had been going to my parents' house for 48 months. 48 months of envelopes arriving in the mail with my name on them. 48 months of my mother or my father opening the mailbox, taking out the envelope, and paying the minimum balance to keep the secret buried. They had smiled at me across Sunday dinner tables. They had asked me how my savings plan was going. They had listened to me talk about the Hillcrest condo, all while holding a $40,000 secret in their hands. Until 3 months ago. 3 months ago, the payments had stopped. That was why the debt was now 90 days past due. That was why the yellow line had appeared on Diane's screen. Somebody had run out of money. I opened my laptop and went to the credit bureau websites. I navigated the automated menus and the security questions. I locked my credit file at all 3 bureaus. I listened to the small electronic chime confirming the freezes were active. I was locking the door 4 years too late, but I locked it anyway. I pulled up my own online banking portal. I looked at my savings account. I looked at the down payment I had meticulously assembled. Then I looked at the negative balance on the printed paper. My family had not just stolen my credit. They had stolen my future. They had done it while pretending to care for me. I picked up my phone. I still did not call them. I opened my calendar. I saw that I was scheduled to attend our regular family dinner in 2 days. A Sunday roast at the house in Orange County. The same house where the statements were mailed. The same house where my wallet had been opened while I slept. I decided I would go to that dinner. I would sit at their table. I would eat their food. I would look at their faces, and I would watch them perform their lies. I needed to see it one last time before I burned it all to the ground. It was 48 hours later, Sunday at 4 in the afternoon. Before I drove to Orange County, I sat at my dining table with the complete credit file I had downloaded on Friday. I went through it with a yellow highlighter. The loan had a payment history graph printed on the third page. I looked at the boxes. 47 months of payments made exactly on time. Never late, never early. Just the minimum required to keep the account in good standing and off the radar of collection agencies. It was a disciplined theft. It required a calendar. It required someone logging into a portal or mailing a physical check every 30 days for almost 4 years. Then came the empty squares. Month 48, month 49, month 50, past due. Somebody had run out of discipline or they had run out of money. I capped the highlighter. I put the file in a drawer. I picked up my keys and drove to my parents' house. I parked in the driveway right behind Derek's leased SUV. The front door was unlocked the way it always was on Sundays. I walked in. The house smelled like roasting garlic and the expensive linen candles my mother bought in bulk. I walked down the hall and into the kitchen. My father Thomas was at the stove stirring a saucepan. My mother Patricia was arranging asparagus on a ceramic platter. My sister Lauren was sitting at the center of the kitchen island with a glass of white wine. I looked at the island. I had seen it dozens of times before, but today I actually looked at it. It was a single slab of Calicotta quartz, 10 feet long, with a waterfall edge dropping cleanly to the floor. My parents had remodeled the kitchen 3 years ago. I remembered my mother complaining about the cost at the time. She had said it was an $8,000 upgrade, but a necessary one for hosting the family during the holidays. 3 years ago was exactly 12 months after the line of credit was opened in my name. I looked at the gray veining in the stone. I wondered how much of my stolen future had paid for the counter my sister was resting her wineglass on. Lauren stood up and hugged me. She wore a silk blouse that draped perfectly across her shoulders. She smelled like a department store perfume counter. She told me I looked tired. I told her the lab had been busy. Her husband Derek came in from the patio, sliding the glass door shut behind him. Derek worked in commercial real estate. Or rather, he talked about working in commercial real estate. His actual closings were rare events that Lauren treated like national holidays. He held up a bottle of beer in greeting. As he lifted his arm, his sleeve pulled back. He was wearing a new watch. It had a heavy silver band and a deep blue dial. The kind of watch that sits behind locked glass at the jeweler. I had spent 4 years eating leftovers out of plastic containers to save for a down payment on a condo. Derek was wearing my down payment on his left wrist. We sat down at the dining table. Dinner went the way dinner always went. Lauren talked. The rest of us provided the audience. She talked about the private school tuition for her 2 children. She complained about the rising cost of flights for their upcoming ski trip to Tahoe. She said it was getting impossible to maintain a decent standard of living in this state. My father poured more wine into her glass. He nodded sympathetically. My mother offered to pack the leftover roast for Lauren to take home, so she would not have to cook on Monday. I ate my asparagus. I weaponized my silence. I answered direct questions with short, agreeable sentences. How is work, Ava? Work is fine. Have you looked at any more condos recently? A few. I let the conversation flow around me without leaving a mark. I watched them perform the roles of a comfortable upper-middle-class family. I watched them pretend. The tension at the table was entirely mine. They were eating dinner. I was sitting in an active crime scene. My mother stood up to clear the plates before dessert. Lauren stood up to help her. I remained at the table with my father and Derek. I watched the kitchen through the open archway. My mother opened the drawer next to the refrigerator, the drawer where she kept postage stamps and takeout menus. She took out a plain white envelope. It was folded in half. It was thick. She handed it to Lauren. She did not hand it over the counter where anyone could see. She passed it low at hip level. Lauren slipped it into the front pocket of her cardigan without looking at it. Neither of them broke their conversation about the dessert plates. The exchange took less than 3 seconds. It was a practiced motion. It was a routine. That was the exact moment the nature of the betrayal shifted in my mind. Until that second, I had allowed a tiny fraction of doubt to exist. I had wondered if maybe there had been a medical emergency 4 years ago, a sudden legal fee, a crisis they had been too ashamed to tell me about. But you do not pass crisis money in a folded envelope while discussing lemon tart. You pass allowance money that way. The line of credit was not a lifeboat. It was a slush fund. My parents had stolen my identity to subsidize my sister's lifestyle. They had sacrificed my financial security so Lauren would not have to budget for ski trips and silk blouses. The theft was not an act of desperation, it was an act of maintenance. They had taken out $40,000 in my name simply to keep up appearances. We ate the lemon tart. My father asked if I wanted coffee before I hit the highway. I looked at the clock on the wall above the archway. It was exactly 8 in the evening. I declined the coffee. I stood up and carried my plate to the sink. I gathered my purse. My mother kissed my cheek. She told me to drive safe and text her when I got home. Lauren waved from the sofa where she was scrolling through her phone. Derek did not look up from the television. I walked out the front door and got into my car. I did not mention the bank. I did not mention the line of credit. I did not ask about the thick white envelope in Lauren's pocket. I started the engine and drove back to San Diego in the dark. I watched the lane lines disappear under the headlights. The silence in my car was no longer empty. It was occupied by a highly specific plan. I knew that family drama was solved by screaming in living rooms, but financial fraud was solved by professionals. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow I was going to find a lawyer. I took a half day off from the hospital on Tuesday morning. I did not search for a lawyer who specialized in family disputes or mediation. Those attorneys deal in emotions and apologies. I searched for a civil litigator who handled financial fraud. I found a man named Victor Gable. His office was located on the second floor of a quiet brick building in downtown San Diego. The waiting room did not have modern art or glass tables. It had heavy wooden chairs and a receptionist who did not ask how my day was going. When I was called into the back room, the environment shifted to something even more deliberate. The office smelled distinctly of lemon polish and old paper. The scent reminded me of a library archive. It was a place where things were kept on record. Victor Gable was 62 years old. He wore a gray suit that was tailored, but not flashy. His desk was entirely clean except for a legal pad and a single silver pen. He did not smile when I sat down. He nodded once and waited for me to speak. I did not start by telling him a story about my childhood. I did not mention my sister or my parents. I opened my purse and took out the paperwork. I laid the printed credit report from the mortgage lender on his desk. Next to it, I placed a certified copy of my hospital admission and discharge records from 4 years ago. I pointed to the origination date of the $40,000 line of credit. Then I pointed to the surgical timeline proving I was under heavy anesthesia on that exact date. Victor put on a pair of reading glasses. He reviewed the credit report. He reviewed the medical file. He checked the dates twice. He did not make sympathetic noises. He did not tell me he was sorry this had happened to me. I appreciated that more than I could articulate. False comfort is useless when you are dealing with stolen money. He took his glasses off and placed them next to his legal pad. He looked directly at me. His voice was quiet and level. He spoke with the cadence of a man who had delivered bad news 1,000 times. "Ava," he said, "I need to explain the reality of California law to you. The bank is currently looking at a $40,000 unsecured debt that is in default. From their perspective, you owe them this money. The fact that the statements went to your parents' address is an anomaly, but it is not a defense. People let family members manage their mail all the time." I sat very still. I asked him what my options were. "You have exactly 2 paths," he replied. "The first path is to claim this was a misunderstanding. You can tell the bank your family had verbal permission to open the account or that you somehow authorized it and forgot. If you choose that path, you assume the debt. You will be legally responsible for the principal, the interest, and the late fees. Your credit score will remain damaged. Your mortgage application will be denied. You will carry this burden until the balance is paid in full." He paused to let that sink in. The silence in the room was dense. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock on the wall behind him. "The second path," he continued, "is to clear your name. But the bank will not simply erase a $40,000 balance because you say it was a mistake. Financial institutions require a mechanism to absorb a loss. That mechanism is a criminal complaint. To clear your credit and save your mortgage, you must file a formal police report for identity theft. You must state under penalty of perjury that this account was opened without your knowledge or consent. Victor leaned forward slightly. He folded his hands on the desk. This means the investigation moves out of the bank's fraud department and into the jurisdiction of law enforcement. The police will follow the paper trail. The trail leads directly to the house in Orange County. He did not break eye contact. He delivered the final piece of the equation. I have had clients sit in that exact chair and swear they want justice. Then the detectives arrive at a family member's door, and the client panics. They try to recant their statement to protect their mother or their sibling. If you file a false police report and then recant, you can face charges yourself. Once you open this door, you cannot close it. I looked at the clean surface of his desk. I thought about the Sunday dinner. I thought about the Calicotta quartz kitchen island. I thought about the heavy silver watch on my brother-in-law's wrist. I thought about the folded white envelope passing from my mother's hand to my sister's pocket. They had purchased their comfort with my name. They had traded my future for a silk blouse and a ski trip. Victor asked the only question that mattered. Are you willing to see someone in handcuffs for this? The question did not frighten me. It clarified everything. The loyalty that usually binds a family together had already been severed 4 years ago. I was not the one breaking the family. I was just the one reading the receipt. Yes, I said. I am willing. Victor nodded. The transaction of facts was complete. He picked up his silver pen. He instructed me to sign a retainer agreement authorizing him to act as my legal counsel. He explained the first step was not the police. The first step was the evidence. He would file a subpoena to the originating bank demanding the original loan documents. We needed to see the physical promissory note. We needed to see whose signature was actually on the paper and what bank account the funds had been transferred into. I signed the retainer. I paid his fee with a cashier's check. I left his office and drove back to the hospital. For the next 5 days, I went to work. I did not alter my routine. I woke up at 6 in the morning. I drank my coffee. I drove to the clinic. I put on my white coat and walked into the hematology lab. My job requires extreme discipline. When you are testing blood samples for coagulation disorders or abnormal cell counts, you cannot rush the process. You place the vials in the centrifuge. You set the timer. You let the machine spin at thousands of revolutions per minute, separating the heavy red cells from the clear plasma. You wait for the science to reveal the truth. I treated the wait for the subpoenaed documents the exact same way. I was the centrifuge. I compartmentalized my interactions. I answered emails from doctors. I calibrated the microscopes. I ate my lunch in the break room and listened to my colleagues talk about their weekend plans. My mother texted me twice during that week. Once to tell me she had found a sale on bath towels and thought of my new condo. Once to send a picture of my sister's children playing in a park. I replied to both texts with a single thumbs-up emoji. I did not offer any words. I maintained the baseline behavior of an obedient daughter. I gave them no reason to suspect the ground beneath their feet was about to open up. The waiting was a physical sensation. It felt like holding a deep breath while standing underwater. You know you have to surface eventually, but you count the seconds to see how long you can remain submerged. I counted the days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The weekend passed with quiet, agonizing slowness. I cleaned my apartment. I organized my pantry. I kept my hands busy so my mind would not wander into anger. Anger is sloppy. Anger makes you send text messages you regret. I needed to remain perfectly cold. Monday morning arrived. The lab was quiet. I was reviewing a slide under the lens when my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I stepped away from the microscope. I took off my gloves. I pulled the phone out. The caller ID displayed Victor Gable's office number. I walked out of the lab and into an empty supply closet. I closed the heavy wooden door behind me. The closet smelled of sterile packaging and rubbing alcohol. I tapped the screen to accept the call. I held the phone to my ear. "Hello, Victor," I said. "Ava," he said. His voice was even quieter than it had been in his office. "I received the digital scans of the original loan documents from the bank this morning. I have them on my screen right now." "Did they sign it?" I asked. Victor paused. It was a deliberate pause. It was the sound of a lawyer preparing to shift the entire foundation of a case. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning," he said. "Do not call anyone in your family tonight. Do not send any text messages. Just listen to me. This is no longer a simple case of identity theft." Tuesday morning, the coastal fog was thick enough to coat the windshield of my sedan. I used the wipers twice on the drive downtown. I parked in the same concrete structure I had used the week before. I walked the 2 blocks to the brick building. My shoes made a dull, flat sound against the pavement. I did not stop for coffee. I did not check my phone. Victor Gable was waiting for me. His office was exactly as I had left it. The scent of lemon polish hung in the air. The desk was clear. He wore a navy suit this time. He did not offer me water or small talk. He pointed to the leather chair across from him, and I sat down. There was a manila folder resting exactly in the center of his blotter. It was not thick. It held maybe 4 pages. Victor placed his hand flat on top of the folder. "The bank complied with the subpoena," he said. "They sent the original origination file for the personal line of credit. I have reviewed it. I need you to look at the 3rd page." He opened the folder and turned the first 2 pages over. He turned the file around so it faced me. He pushed it 3 inches across the wood. It was a standard banking instrument, a promissory note. It contained the standard boilerplate language about interest rates and default penalties and repayment terms. At the very bottom of the page, there was a section labeled Primary Borrower. My full legal name was printed on the line. Next to the printed name was a signature in blue ink. I looked at the blue ink. I looked at the way the pen had moved across the paper. Handwriting is a physical habit. It is muscle memory formed over decades. When I sign my name, I use sharp angles. The capital letter resembles a pitched roof. The lowercase letters are narrow trenches. I write the way I work in the lab, precise and constrained. The signature on this document was not precise. It was hurried. The capital letter had a wide, extravagant slope. The trailing letters looped back on themselves. It was the handwriting of someone who preferred speed over accuracy. I knew this handwriting. In my apartment, I kept a shoebox full of birthday cards and holiday notes. I kept them because my mother had taught me it was polite to preserve correspondence. My family members had very specific handwriting. Her letters were sharp and vertical. She wrote grocery lists that looked like architectural blueprints. My father had blocky handwriting. He pressed the pen so hard it left ridges on the back of the paper. The blue ink on the promissory note did not belong to my mother. It did not belong to my father. It belonged to Lauren. I saw the wide, extravagant slope of the first letter and recognized the exact same motion she used to sign every birthday card she had ever given me. I recognized the looping curve from the thank you notes she wrote for her wedding gifts. Lauren had held a blue pen and forged my legal signature to steal $40,000. Victor was watching my face. He saw the recognition register in my eyes. "She forged it," I said. My voice was very flat. "Lauren forged my name." Victor nodded once. "Look at the section directly below that," he said. I moved my eyes down the page. Below the primary borrower line, there was a secondary section. It was labeled guarantors. Banks do not hand out large, unsecured lines of credit to young adults without leverage. If the primary borrower does not have sufficient income history, the bank requires a safety net. They require someone else to promise the debt will be paid if the primary borrower defaults. Being a guarantor is not a casual favor. It requires providing your own social security number. It requires handing over your tax returns and proof of income to a loan officer. It is a deliberate and documented process. There were 2 signatures in the guarantor section. They were signed in black ink. The first signature was sharp and vertical. The second signature was heavy and blocky. Patricia and Thomas. My mother and my father. The air in the room seemed to stop moving. I looked at the black ink. I looked at the blue ink. The dates written next to all three signatures were identical. October 12th. October 12th was the Tuesday I was lying in my childhood bedroom recovering from gallbladder surgery. I had surgical staples in my abdomen. I was taking prescribed narcotics every 6 hours. I had been drifting in and out of a heavy chemical sleep. To execute a document with a primary borrower and two guarantors, the parties must sign in the same time frame. They must coordinate the approval. The betrayal shifted. It rearranged its shape in my mind. It evolved from a simple theft into a coordinated family conspiracy. My sister had not stolen my identity in secret. She had not gone to a computer in the middle of the night and clicked a button while my parents were asleep. She had stood in a room with them. My mother and my father had watched their oldest daughter pick up a blue pen and commit a felony against their youngest daughter. They had watched her forge my name. Then my father had picked up a black pen and co-signed the fraud. My mother had picked up the same black pen and added her name to the bottom line. They had colluded to sacrifice my financial security. They had curated a financial portfolio to support Lauren's crime. They had approved the theft to push the money through the banking system. They had done this downstairs while I was upstairs in their house bleeding into a surgical drain. My stoicism broke. It did not break with a scream. It did not break with tears. It broke in a sudden physical failure of my own lungs. I closed my eyes. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit the back of my neck. My chest felt hollow. I realized I was gripping the wooden arms of the leather chair so hard my fingers were numb. I listened to the sound of my own pulse hammering in my ears. The rhythm was fast and uneven. The sterile scent of the hospital iodine from 4 years ago suddenly flooded my memory, bleeding into the lemon polish of the law office. I allowed myself to feel the entirety of the betrayal. I let the grief of losing my entire family wash over me in one terrible wave. I sat in the dark behind my closed eyelids and I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I opened my eyes. I took one slow, deep breath. I let the air out of my lungs through my nose. The grief was gone. It had burned itself out in 10 seconds. What remained was a focus so sharp it felt dangerous. Victor had not spoken a word. He had sat perfectly still and allowed me to process the paper on his desk. He knew better than to interrupt a client who was reading the exact coordinates of their own ruin. I let go of the armrests. I placed my hands flat on my thighs. They were all in the room, I said. Yes, Victor replied. They colluded. The guarantor signatures mean your parents accepted legal liability for the forged document. They facilitated the crime to ensure the bank released the funds. If I file the police report, I said they will all be implicated. Victor leaned back in his chair. That is correct. If you sign the identity theft affidavit, the bank will pass this file to the fraud division of the police department. The detective will look at these 3 signatures. They will investigate your sister for forgery and wire fraud. They will investigate your parents as co-conspirators. The consequences will not be limited to your sister. It will sweep the entire board. I thought about the Sunday dinner. I thought about my mother sliding the thick white envelope into Lauren's cardigan. I thought about my father pouring wine and nodding in sympathy while Lauren complained about the cost of living. They had sat at that table feeling safe. They believed their secret was buried under 4 years of minimum payments. They believed I was too obedient to ever question them. Prepare the affidavit, I said. Victor picked up his silver pen. Are you certain, Ava? I am certain. Draw up the paperwork. I will sign it today. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. He began to write. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the office. As I sat there watching him write, I realized the police investigation would take time. The bank would take time to process the fraud claim. Law enforcement operates on a slow, methodical timeline. I did not want to wait for a detective to knock on their door in a month. I wanted to hear them admit what they had done. I needed to lock them into a lie before the police read them their rights. I needed a confession. I could not rely on the paper trail alone to explain the motive. The paper only proved the mechanics of the theft. I wanted to look them in the eyes and understand the justification. I took my cell phone out of my purse. I looked at the blank screen. I knew that my family responded to one thing better than anything else. They responded to panic. If they thought their secret was in danger, they would rush to contain it. They would try to manage me the way they had managed me my entire life. I needed to set a trap. I needed to force them into a room where they felt in control right up until the moment the floor collapsed. I opened my messaging app and started a new group text. I sat in the leather chair across from Victor and opened the group message thread on my phone. The thread was titled Family. The last message was a photograph of a golden retriever puppy my mother had seen at the grocery store 3 days ago. I moved my thumb over the keyboard. I needed to construct a message that was entirely factual, but designed to trigger an immediate panic response. I typed slowly. Hey guys, the underwriter flagged a serious issue on my credit report today. Someone opened a large line of credit using my social security number a few years ago and it is in default. The bank paused my mortgage. I am meeting with a fraud investigator tomorrow to pull the original signature files and run a trace on the bank transfers. I just froze all my accounts. I will keep you updated. I read the text twice to ensure there were no emotional words. There was no accusation. It read like a standard update from a daughter sharing bad news with her support system. I pressed send. I stood up and put the phone in my purse. Victor did not ask what I had done. He simply handed me a copy of the retainer agreement. I thanked him for his time and walked out of the office. I did not even make it to the parking garage before the reaction began. The phone vibrated against my hip. I took it out and looked at the screen. It had been exactly 12 minutes since I sent the message. My father was calling. I watched his name flash on the display. In my family, Thomas was the manager of crises. Whenever my sister caused a problem, my father would step in to negotiate the fallout. He was a man who believed every consequence could be mitigated if you just controlled the narrative early enough. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it vibrated again. My father calling a second time. I let it ring. I reached my car and unlocked the door. The phone vibrated a third time. It was my mother, Patricia. She never called me during my work hours unless someone was in the hospital. I put the phone in the cup holder and started the engine. By the time I merged onto the highway, the notifications were arriving in a continuous, unbroken rhythm. I drove in silence and listened to the plastic casing of the phone rattle against the cup holder. It was the sound of a carefully constructed lie beginning to collapse. I drove back to the hospital. I walked into the staff locker room and changed into my scrubs. I left my phone in my locker. I did not put it on silent. I wanted it to catalog every single moment of their desperation while I went to work. I spent the afternoon running coagulation assays. I measured the time it took for blood plasma to clot. It is a process that requires exact calibration. You add a reagent to the sample, and you watch the chemical reaction occur under strict parameters. I thought about my family. I had added the reagent to their lives. The reaction was currently happening in Orange County. I just had to wait for the results to solidify. My shift ended at 6. I opened my locker and checked the screen. There were 3 voicemails from my father. There were 2 missed calls from my mother. There was a direct text message from my sister Lauren. Lauren's message was a masterpiece of forced casualness. It read, "Hey sweetie, Mom mentioned your text. That sounds so stressful, but it is probably just a clerical error. Do not panic and hire anyone expensive yet. Let us grab coffee right now and figure it out together. I can help you call the bank." Lauren had spent her entire adult life managing her mistakes by taking control of the investigation. If she could sit next to me while I called the bank, she could steer the conversation. She could intercept the details. She was offering to help me put out a fire that she had intentionally started. I listened to the voicemails on the drive to my apartment. My father's first message was brief. "Ava, call me back as soon as you get this. We need to discuss this bank issue before you sign anything with an investigator." His second message arrived 8 minutes later. The tone was tighter. The management facade was slipping. Ava, it is Dad again. Do not open a formal fraud case yet. Sometimes these things are just mixed files. Call me. I know a guy who handles credit disputes. His third message was left an hour later. The background noise was different. He was not in his home office. He sounded like he was walking outside. Ava, you are scaring your mother. Pick up the phone. I did not pick up the phone. I used their panic as leverage. Silence is a vacuum. When you refuse to speak to guilty people, they will rush to fill the empty space with their own anxiety. They will run through every possible scenario. They will try to anticipate what the investigator already knows. They will coordinate their stories and look for the weak points in their own lies. I arrived at my apartment. I made a simple dinner of rice and steamed vegetables. I ate at the kitchen counter and watched the sun go down over the city. I washed my dish. I dried it. At exactly 9 in the evening, I picked up my phone. I ignored my father and my sister. I opened a direct message to my mother. I typed, "Sorry, I was stuck in the lab all day and could not answer the phone. The investigator needs my tax returns from 4 years ago to match my verified signature against the forged documents. I am coming over tomorrow night at 7 to look through the filing cabinet in the hallway. See you then." I pressed send. I turned the phone completely off. I placed it face down on the counter. I had just started a ticking clock. I had given them a 22-hour deadline. They knew what was in that filing cabinet. They knew the timeline. They now believed that an outside investigator was actively waiting for my signature samples. They had 22 hours to construct a unified defense. They would spend the entire night awake. They would argue. They would likely drag Lauren's husband Derek into the crossfire. They would expend all their energy trying to build a wall of plausible deniability. I had 22 hours to let them dig their own graves. I went into my bedroom and opened my nightstand drawer. I took out a small digital voice recorder. I had purchased it online years ago to record university lectures. I put 2 fresh batteries into the compartment. I pressed the record button. I spoke my name and the current date into the microphone. I pressed stop and played it back. The audio was crisp and clear. The device was smaller than a deck of cards. It would fit perfectly into the side pocket of my leather purse. I went to sleep at 10 o'clock. I slept 8 hours without waking up once. My conscience was perfectly clear. The next day at the lab felt different. The air felt lighter. I processed my samples with a steady hand. I did not turn my phone back on until my lunch break. When the screen illuminated, there were no new voicemails. There were no new texts. The sudden silence from Orange County confirmed everything. They had stopped trying to reach me because they realized management was no longer an option. They were preparing for an ambush. They were gathering their excuses. They were practicing their shocked faces. They were deciding exactly how much of the truth they could admit to without handing me the rope to hang them. I finished my shift. I drove home and changed my clothes. I put on a pair of dark jeans and a plain gray sweater. I wanted to look exactly like the foundation they expected me to be. Unassuming, reliable, dull. I placed the digital voice recorder into the side pocket of my purse. I pressed the record button. I walked out of my apartment and got into my car. The drive to Orange County was the same distance it had been on Sunday, but the architecture of my reality was entirely different. I was no longer a daughter going to visit her parents. I was a witness walking into a deposition. I parked my car on the street instead of the driveway. I took one final breath of the cool evening air. I walked up the concrete path to the front door and reached for the handle. The front door opened with a soft click. I stepped into the foyer. The house was usually bright on a weekday evening, but tonight the living room lamps were turned off. The only illumination came from the recessed lighting over the kitchen island. Lauren was pacing. She walked from the refrigerator to the stainless steel sink and back again. Her heels made a sharp, repetitive sound against the hardwood floor. She was wearing a beige cashmere sweater. Derek was noticeably absent. My father, Thomas, sat on one of the high stools with his hands clasped tightly in front of him. My mother, Patricia, stood near the stove clutching a dish towel. The air in the room was dense. It felt the way the atmosphere feels right before a pressure valve fails. I walked into the kitchen. I did not greet them. I did not ask where Derek was. I went straight to the island and pulled out the chair directly across from my father. I sat down. I reached into my purse. The red recording light on the digital device was glowing steadily in the dark side pocket. I withdrew a plain manila folder. It contained blank printer paper. It did not matter what was inside. It only mattered that they believed it was the bank file. I laid it flat on the quartz counter. They all stared at the folder. They treated it like a live wire. I looked at my sister. Then I looked at my mother. Finally, I rested my gaze on my father. I did not raise my voice. I did not display anger. I asked a single question. Who stopped making the payments? The question bypassed the denial phase completely. It skipped over the outrage and the demand for a confession. It established that I already possessed the facts and was only inquiring about the administrative failure. My mother broke first. Patricia brought the dish towel to her face and began to cry. It was a wet, heavy sobbing. She inhaled with sharp, hitching gasps. I had seen her do this a dozen times throughout my childhood. Whenever a conversation veered toward accountability, she would deploy her tears. It was a calculated performance designed to force everyone else in the room to stop the discussion and comfort her. I did not comfort her. I let her cry. The sound echoed in the kitchen and died against the tile backsplash. When no one moved to soothe her, the crying abruptly stopped. She lowered the towel and stared at me with red eyes. My father shifted his weight on the stool. He looked down at the floorboards. He could not meet my gaze. Lauren stepped forward. She placed her hands flat on the edge of the quartz island. She took a deep breath and assumed the tone she used when speaking to service workers who had made a minor mistake. It was dismissive and entirely confident. "Ava, you need to calm down," Lauren said. "This is blowing way out of proportion. It was a temporary bridge loan." I kept my hands folded in my lap. I did not point out that 4 years was not temporary. I waited for her to fill the silence. 4 years ago, Derek and I were trying to close on a commercial real estate flip, Lauren continued. The market was shifting. My personal credit was temporarily locked because of a dispute with a contractor. If we did not secure liquid capital within a week, we were going to lose the earnest money. It was a sure thing. She waved her hand in the air as if waving away a fly. "We needed a clean applicant," she said. "You had no debt. You were heavily medicated from the gallbladder removal. The doctors said you would be in and out of it for a week. We knew you would want to help the family, but you were too sick to understand the paperwork at the time. We did you a favor by handling the logistics. It was a family favor." I watched my sister's face. She genuinely believed her own narrative. In her mind, stealing my identity while I bled into a surgical drain was an act of sibling efficiency. She had repackaged a felony into a logistical shortcut. "Why did the payments stop?" I asked. Lauren sighed. Her shoulders dropped in a display of manufactured exhaustion. "Derek had a bad quarter. Some commissions got delayed. The cash flow got tight. I missed 3 payments. It is not the end of the world, Ava. I am getting a bonus on Friday. I will wire the arrears directly to the bank and bring the account current. You can tell your investigator it was a clerical mix-up. The underwriter will unfreeze your mortgage by next week." She reached across the island and patted the manila folder. "We will catch it up by Friday, sweetie. Everything is fine." I let her hand rest on the folder. I turned my attention to my father. "Why did you co-sign a forgery?" I asked. The kitchen went entirely still. Lauren pulled her hand back from the folder. My father closed his eyes. The muscle in his jaw twitched. "The guarantor sections," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You and Mom signed your names below Lauren's forgery. You pledged your own assets to secure a loan drawn against my social security number." "Why?" My father looked up. His face was the color of old ash. He swallowed hard. "She promised she would pay it off in 6 months," he mumbled. His voice was so quiet the digital recorder in my purse barely registered the sound. He cleared his throat and tried again. "She said the real estate deal would close in 6 months, Ava." Derek was getting suspicious about their finances. Derek has a temper when it comes to money. If he found out she had drained their joint savings to pay off her credit cards, he would have left her. We could not let her marriage fall apart. She just needed a bridge. We co-signed so the bank would push it through fast. We did not want to involve you. You were building your own life. I processed his explanation. I cataloged the sequence of priorities. Lauren's marriage was in trouble because she was secretly drowning in credit card debt. Derek required the illusion of wealth to remain satisfied. To preserve Lauren's marriage, my parents needed to manufacture $40,000 in untraceable cash. They could not use their own credit because they were already over-leveraged, so they used the daughter who lived quietly in an apartment and packed her own lunches. They had protected Lauren's reckless spending by offering my spotless record to the bank. I looked at my mother. Patricia was twisting the dish towel around her knuckles. "We meant to tell you," she whispered. "We really did." But then the 6 months turned into a year, and Lauren kept making the monthly payments on time. It seemed like there was no harm done. It was just a piece of paper sitting in a file cabinet, just a piece of paper. I placed my hands flat on the table. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood. I stood up. "Ava," Lauren said. Her dismissive tone was gone. Panic was starting to bleed through the edges of her voice. "Ava, where are you going? I told you I will wire the money on Friday. Just call the bank tomorrow and tell them it is fine." I did not accept the apology. I did not acknowledge the promise. I picked up the blank manila folder. I walked around the kitchen island. My father reached a hand out toward my arm, but he did not dare touch me. I walked past him. I walked past my mother and her twisted dish towel. I walked down the hallway and out the front door. I heard Lauren call my name from the porch as I unlocked my car. I did not turn around. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I pulled away from the curb. I drove 3 blocks before I pulled over under a street lamp. I reached into my purse. I pulled out the digital voice recorder. I pressed the stop button. I hit rewind and pressed play. My father's voice played through the small speaker. We co-signed so the bank would push it through fast. My sister's voice followed. "We knew you would want to help the family, but you were too sick to understand the paperwork." I stopped the playback. I had given them exactly enough rope, and they had tied the knot themselves. The admission was secured. The motive was documented. I had the audio file that proved premeditation, coercion, and active fraud. But as I sat under the glow of the street lamp, a new discrepancy began to bother me. It was a detail Lauren had thrown out to justify the theft. She claimed the money was for a commercial real estate flip. She claimed Derek's commissions were delayed. She claimed she needed liquid capital to save earnest money. Derek was an arrogant man who wore luxury watches and leased expensive SUVs. If he was closing commercial real estate deals, he would not need a $40,000 bridge loan from his sister-in-law. $40,000 in the commercial property market is a rounding error. It is nothing. Furthermore, if Derek was involved in the flip, why had Lauren kept the loan a secret from him? My father had explicitly stated they hid the theft to keep Derek from finding out about Lauren's drained savings. The narrative did not align with the math. The $40,000 never went to a real estate deal. The money went somewhere else. I put the car in drive. I headed back to San Diego. I knew my next step. The family intervention was over. The criminal investigation was about to begin. I needed to hand the recording to Victor Gable, and I needed to find out exactly whose bank account absorbed $40,000 of my money 4 years ago. I returned to Victor Gable's office on Wednesday morning at 9 sharp. I did not bring a folder of blank printer paper this time. I brought the digital voice recorder. I placed it on his polished desk. I pressed the play button. Victor listened to the audio capture from the kitchen in Orange County. He listened to my father admit they co-signed the document to protect Lauren's marriage. He listened to my sister confess that she forged the paperwork because she needed liquid capital and assumed I was too medicated to notice. He did not react to the sound of my mother's weeping in the background. Victor treated the recording the same way he treated a bank statement. It was just a piece of data. He opened his top drawer and pulled out a stapled packet of paper. It was the formal identity theft affidavit. I read every line carefully. The document required me to state, under penalty of perjury, that I did not authorize the line of credit. It required me to affirm that I received no benefit from the dispersed funds. I picked up the silver pen from the desk. I signed my name at the bottom. My signature had sharp angles. It did not loop. Victor took the paperwork and placed it inside a fresh manila folder. He explained the geometry of what was about to happen. Financial fraud operates on specific jurisdictional thresholds. A stolen credit card used at a gas station might stay with local patrol officers. A forged promissory note involving bank wire transfers and a balance of $40,000 triggers a completely different echelon of law enforcement. The dollar amount elevated the crime. The use of electronic bank routing elevated it further. It moved immediately to the Financial Crimes Division. Victor digitized the sworn affidavit and the audio file. He submitted the legal package to the Bank Fraud Department and the local police precinct simultaneously. The dispute was no longer a family disagreement. It was a matter of state and federal penal codes. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a municipal government number. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Russo. She was an investigator with the Financial Crimes Unit. We arranged a meeting for that afternoon. Detective Russo was 50 years old. She wore a sensible navy blazer over a plain gray blouse. She did not offer me coffee. She did not offer sympathetic platitudes about how hard it must be to investigate your own family. She spoke only in facts. She treated emotions the way a mechanic treats a stripped screw. Useless, and in the way of the actual work. Russo informed me the originating bank had reviewed the affidavit and the audio file. They had officially flagged the loan as fraudulent. All internal collection efforts against my name were suspended. The criminal investigation was now active. She had already submitted warrants for the bank routing numbers attached to the original loan disbursement. She warned me that tracing financial webs required patience. I told her I worked in a laboratory calibrating equipment. Patience was my primary professional skill. I left the precinct and initiated a total communications quarantine. I opened the settings on my cell phone. I navigated to my contact list. I selected my father's name and pressed block. I selected my mother's name and pressed block. I selected my sister Lauren and pressed block. I did the same for my brother-in-law Derek. I did not send a warning message. I did not write a long letter explaining my boundaries or expressing my disappointment. I just built an invisible wall. I went back to the hospital. I processed my samples. I documented red blood cell counts. I ate my lunch in the break room. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. I knew they were panicking in Orange County. I knew they were trying to call me and finding a deadline. I knew they were wondering if I had gone to the bank or if I had gone to the police. I let them wonder. 14 days passed in perfect quiet. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Detective Russo requested a joint meeting at Victor Gable's office. I arrived in my scrubs. Russo unzipped her leather portfolio and laid a printed spreadsheet on the table. It was the financial autopsy of the $40,000. When a bank approves a personal line of credit, they disperse the funds via wire transfer. Russo had followed the wire. She traced the money from the origin point to its final destination. Lauren had claimed the money was a temporary bridge loan for a commercial real estate flip. She claimed she needed the cash to save earnest money on a commercial property. If that narrative were true, the funds would have moved into a business escrow account or a title company holding fund. Russo pointed to the destination routing number printed on the spreadsheet. The money had not gone to an escrow account. It had landed in a standard retail joint checking account. The account belonged to Lauren and Derek. I looked at the withdrawal column on the ledger. The $40,000 did not sit in the account waiting for a commercial closing date. It was spent with astonishing speed. The entire balance evaporated in exactly 21 days. Russo walked me through the itemized expenses. 4 days after the forged loan was funded, $12,000 was transferred to a luxury auto dealership. It was the initiation fee and down payment on the leased SUV Derek drove to Sunday dinners. He had parked that car in my parents' driveway for 4 years. A week later, $8,000 was paid to a high-end travel agency. The payment covered flights and lodging for a 5-star resort vacation. I remembered Lauren returning from a 10-day trip to Maui 3.5 years ago. She had brought me a small souvenir keychain shaped like a sea turtle. I realized in the quiet of the law office that the souvenir keychain was purchased with my own stolen credit capacity. The remaining $20,000 was distributed among 4 different premium credit cards. Lauren had maxed out her retail accounts at Nordstrom and Neiman Marcus. She had used my signature to wipe the slate clean so she could resume shopping. The commercial real estate business was a phantom. The earnest money crisis was a fiction. Lauren invented the story to make my parents feel like they were rescuing an entrepreneur instead of funding a shopping addiction. Lauren had stolen my name to fund a lifestyle she could not afford. She wanted the luxury car and the island vacation and the designer clothes. My parents had co-signed the theft so they would not have to admit their golden child was a financial failure. They sacrificed my future to maintain the illusion of her success. The truth was captured in the black and white ink of the bank ledger. There was no ambiguity left. Detective Russo gathered the paperwork and slid it back into her portfolio. She informed me that she had gathered sufficient evidence to secure an arrest warrant for wire fraud and identity theft. She was preparing the final file for the district attorney. The net was closing. Lauren was about to realize the bank was no longer asking for payments. The police were going to start asking for her banking records. The quarantine I had built around myself was about to be tested. Desperate people do not respect boundaries. They look for a weak point. I did not know it yet, but Lauren was already searching for mine. The sterile environment of a medical laboratory offers a specific kind of sanctuary. You are surrounded by protocol. Every hazard is labeled. Every biohazard bin is sealed. The air is filtered and temperature controlled to protect the integrity of the samples. Chaos is not permitted past the double doors. It had been 3 days since Detective Russo showed me the itemized bank ledger in Victor Gable's office. The legal machinery had begun to turn. I knew the bank fraud department would lock the affected accounts while the police served their subpoenas. I knew a financial freeze was imminent. I just did not know exactly what hour the ice would form. I found out on a Thursday afternoon at 2:14. I was walking down the main corridor from the centrifuge station to the staff break room. I was holding a clipboard with a fresh stack of calibration logs. The hallway was lined with pale blue linoleum. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed with their usual low frequency. I heard the sound of footsteps moving too fast for a clinical setting. I stopped and turned. It was my sister, Lauren. She was walking rapidly down the corridor toward me. The security desk for our wing is located on the ground floor. Visitors are required to sign in and wear a printed badge. Lauren was not wearing a badge. She had spent her entire life learning how to bypass rules meant for other people. She knew how to leverage a frantic smile and a fabricated emergency to slip past a distracted receptionist, but she was not smiling now. I stood still and let her close the distance between us. The smugness she had worn in the kitchen in Orange County was gone. The practiced, dismissive tone had vanished. She looked like a woman who had just watched a heavy door lock from the outside. She was wearing a wrinkled beige trench coat over dark leggings. Her hair was pulled back into a sloppy knot. Her makeup was unblended. She reached me and stopped. She was breathing hard. She smelled of stale department store perfume and cold sweat. "Ava," she said. Her voice was thin and shaking. "Ava, you have to fix this right now." I did not step back. I held my clipboard. "How did you get into this hallway, Lauren?" She ignored the question. She reached out and grabbed my forearm. Her fingers dug into the fabric of my white lab coat. "They froze the account," she whispered frantically. Her eyes darted up and down the empty corridor. "Derek went to buy coffee this morning and the debit card declined. He called the bank. The fraud department told him his primary checking was under an active police hold. They told him there was a criminal investigation attached to his social security number." I looked down at her hand grabbing my arm. I did not pull away. I just stared at her fingers until she realized what she was doing. She slowly released her grip and let her hand drop to her side. "Derek is furious," she continued. The words were spilling out of her mouth in a hurried, desperate rush. "He does not know about the line of credit, Ava. He does not know about the forged signature. He thinks it is a mistake. If he finds out I funneled unauthorized money into our joint account, he will divorce me. He will take the house. You have to call the investigator. You have to tell them it is a civil dispute. I listened to her panic. I processed the structure of her fear. She was not afraid of the law. She was not experiencing guilt over stealing my identity. She was entirely consumed by the threat of her husband discovering she was a financial liability. Derek required the illusion of wealth. Lauren had purchased his affection with my credit score. Now the purchase was being recalled. I looked at her side. When she dropped her hand from my arm, it came to rest against her purse. My sister had come to my workplace to beg for mercy over a $40,000 theft. While she stood in the pale blue hallway, pleading poverty and marital ruin, she was clutching a designer handbag. It was crafted from quilted black lambskin. It featured a heavy gold chain strap and a polished metallic closure. I recognized the brand. It was an accessory that retailed for a minimum of $2,000. She was carrying my stolen future over her shoulder while demanding I absorb the consequences of her crime. "Please," Ava Lauren said. Her eyes filled with tears. The tears spilled over her lower lashes and ran down her cheeks. "If I am arrested, they will call Child Protective Services. Think of your niece and nephew. Do you want them to see their mother taken away in handcuffs? Do you want to ruin their lives over money?" I thought about her children. I remembered holding her son in the hospital the day he was born. I had opened a college savings account for him that same afternoon. I had deposited $50 a month into it for 8 years. Lauren had always used her children as human shields. Whenever she wrecked a car or missed a rent payment, she would weep about how the stress was affecting her kids. She weaponized motherhood to force our parents into compliance. She assumed the tactic would work on me. She assumed incorrectly. "Lauren," I said. My voice was very quiet. It was the tone you use in a library. "I want you to listen to me carefully." She stopped crying for a fraction of a second. She held her breath, waiting for the concession. She was waiting for the familiar relief of being rescued. "You made a choice 4 years ago," I said. "The bank is making theirs now." Lauren stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She looked at my face, searching for the sister who had always remained in the background. She was searching for the foundation. She found a brick wall. I did not wait for her to recover her voice. I turned my back to her. I walked 3 steps to the wall-mounted telephone located next to the biohazard disposal bin. I lifted the receiver and pressed the single-digit code for hospital security. The dispatcher answered immediately. "This is the lab manager in the East Wing corridor," I said. "I have an unauthorized visitor who bypassed the front desk. She is refusing to leave the restricted area. Please send an escort." I hung up the phone. Ava Lauren gasped. Her voice cracked. "You are my sister." I turned back to face her. I looked at the quilted lambskin leather of her handbag. I looked at her trembling hands. "You lost the right to use that word when you picked up a blue pen on a Tuesday in October." We stood in the hallway in total silence for 2 minutes. I did not speak. She did not speak. The fluorescent lights hummed. The truth settled over her like a heavy physical weight. The tears dried on her face. She realized the tears had no currency in this building. The elevator doors at the end of the corridor opened. A uniformed security guard stepped out. He walked toward us with a measured professional stride. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Lauren. "Ma'am," he said politely, "you need to come with me." Lauren looked at the guard. Then she looked back at me. The desperation in her eyes hardened into something sharp and hateful. It was the look of a predator realizing the trap had closed. She adjusted the heavy gold chain on her shoulder. She turned around and walked toward the elevator. Her heels clicked unevenly against the linoleum. She did not look back. I watched the elevator doors slide shut. I returned to my office adjacent to the centrifuge station. I closed the door. I sat down at my desk and opened my email client. I created a new message addressed to Victor Gable. "I operate on the principle of documentation. A conversation that is not recorded is merely a rumor." I typed out a precise incident report. I noted the exact time of arrival. I noted the method of entry. I transcribed Lauren's admission regarding her frozen bank accounts and her husband's lack of knowledge. I detailed her attempt to use her children to coerce me into dropping the investigation. I stated the exact time hospital security escorted her from the premises. I attached the email to my legal file and pressed send. The paper trail now included attempted witness intimidation. I leaned back in my desk chair and looked at the blank wall opposite my computer monitor. Lauren had failed. The ambush had yielded no results. She would leave the hospital and she would call the house in Orange County. She would tell our parents that the soft, quiet daughter was gone. If the primary beneficiary of the fraud could not force my compliance, the CO signers would be deployed next. The escalation was inevitable. I knew Thomas and Patricia would not wait long. I anticipated a secondary assault. When you cut off the primary beneficiary of a fraud, they will inevitably send their enablers to breach the perimeter. I just did not know what day my parents would arrive. They chose Friday. I left the hospital at 5:30. The drive to my apartment complex took 20 minutes. I pulled into my assigned parking space in the outdoor lot. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete. I turned off the ignition. Before I could unbuckle my seatbelt, a shadow fell across my driver's side window. I looked up. My father was standing right outside my door. My mother was standing half a step behind him. I did not startle. I sat in the quiet of my car for 10 seconds. I observed them through the glass. My parents had always maintained a strict aesthetic. They lived in an affluent Orange County suburb and dressed to match the property values. My father typically wore pressed slacks and polo shirts. My mother frequented a salon every 3 weeks to maintain her blonde highlights. The people standing outside my car looked like hollow replicas. My father's posture was slumped. The collar of his shirt was frayed. My mother's hair was pulled back into a severe clip, exposing dark roots she had failed to conceal. They looked like people who had not slept a full night in weeks. I opened the car door. I stepped out into the evening air. The asphalt was still warm from the afternoon sun. I closed the door and locked it with my key fob. "Ava," my father said. His voice lacked its usual commanding resonance. It sounded thin and worn. "We need to talk to you right now." I stood my ground next to the vehicle. "You have nothing to say to me that I need to hear," I replied. My mother pushed past his shoulder. She stepped into my personal space. Her eyes were red-rimmed and frantic. She did not bother with greetings or apologies. She went straight to the accusations. "You are destroying this family over money," she hissed. Her voice trembled with a manufactured outrage. "Over a simple piece of paper. Lauren called us yesterday in hysterics. She said security threw her out of your building. She said the bank froze her accounts. You are going to make your own sister a convicted felon over a mistake." I looked at my mother. I noted the absence of the diamond tennis bracelet she usually wore on her right wrist. I noted the tremor in her hands. "Forging a legal document is not a mistake," I said. "It is a choice." My father stepped forward and raised a hand to silence my mother. He reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out a rectangular slip of paper. He held it out toward me. "We can fix this, Ava," he said. His tone shifted into a desperate plea. "We can make it right. I have a cashier's check here for $5,000. Take it. Use it as a good faith payment to the bank. Tell the investigator you found a discrepancy in your own records and you want to withdraw the police report. The bank will take the money and drop the charges." He pushed the paper closer to my chest. "Just take it," he urged. "We will pay you the rest in monthly installments. We promise. You will not lose a single dime. Just call off the detectives." I did not reach for the check. I looked down at it. My parents had banked at the same national institution for 30 years. Their checks were always printed on pale blue paper with a distinct corporate watermark. The paper my father was holding was not pale blue. It was a harsh neon green. I let my eyes scan the printed text on the front of the draft. It was not issued by Chase or Wells Fargo. The logo in the top left corner belonged to a regional payday lending franchise. It was a storefront business that offered high-interest title loans and immediate cash advances to people who had exhausted all traditional lines of credit. I process anomalies for a living. I look at a slide and identify the cell that does not belong. The neon green check was a glaring anomaly. People who live in custom homes with Calicut quartz islands do not go to payday lenders for $5,000. People with robust retirement portfolios do not secure cash advances at 30% interest. I looked back up at my father's face. The thinness of his voice, the frayed collar, the missing diamond bracelet on my mother's wrist. The data points suddenly connected, forming a devastating picture. "Where did you get this money?" I asked. My father blinked. He tried to maintain his composure. "We transferred it from a secondary account," he lied. "It does not matter where it came from. It is guaranteed funds." I did not accept the lie. I pointed at the neon green paper. "That is a short-term title loan draft," I said. "That is predatory lending. You only go to a place like that if your primary bank accounts are empty and your credit cards are maxed out. Where is your retirement money?" The parking lot was silent. The distant hum of the highway traffic seemed to fade away. My mother's face crumpled. The manufactured outrage collapsed, leaving nothing but raw, genuine terror. She covered her mouth with her hand and looked away. My father slowly lowered his arm. The check fluttered slightly in the evening breeze. He stared at the asphalt. "Where is your 401k?" I asked again. My voice was devoid of emotion. I was conducting an autopsy on a living patient. "Where is the pension?" "It is gone," he whispered. The admission hung in the air between us. "Explain it to me," I demanded. He let out a long, defeated breath. "Lauren came to us 3 years ago," he said. His eyes remained fixed on the ground. Derek had not closed a real estate deal in 18 months. They were drowning. The bank was threatening to foreclose on their house. They were going to lose the cars. She was terrified Derek would leave her if he knew how bad it was. She begged us for help. "You paid her mortgages," I stated. It was not a question. "We paid the mortgages," my father confessed. "We paid the car leases. We paid the private school tuition. We thought it would just be for a few months until Derek got back on his feet. But the commissions never came, and Lauren refused to downsize. She said she could not bear the humiliation of pulling the kids out of their school. She kept needing more." I looked at the two people who had raised me. They had spent their entire adult lives building a comfortable nest egg. They had worked decades to secure their golden years. "And you drained your entire life savings to maintain her illusion," I said. "We had to," my mother cried out, turning back to face me. "She is your sister. She is family. You do not abandon family when they are struggling." "You abandoned me 4 years ago," I countered. My voice remained perfectly steady. The logic of her defense was fundamentally flawed. "You watched her steal my identity while I was bleeding in your spare bedroom. You co-signed a felony to give her a bridge loan because you did not want to dip into your own savings yet. You sacrificed my credit first." My father looked up. His eyes were wide and pleading. "We are out of options, Ava. If she goes to prison, we lose everything. We have nothing left to give her. You are the only one who can stop this. Take the $5,000. Call the police. Tell them it is over." I looked at the cashier's check one last time. It represented the final desperate gasp of two people who had willingly boarded a sinking ship and were now demanding I throw them my only life preserver. "I am not taking your money," I said. My father stepped closer. "Ava, please." I stepped back, creating a clear physical boundary. "It is out of my hands," I told them. "The district attorney has the file. Detective Russo has the bank records. The state of California is pressing charges. You cannot bribe the criminal justice system with a payday loan." My mother's legs seemed to give out. She leaned heavily against the side of my car. "We are going to lose the house," she sobbed. I stood in the fading light and looked at them. The conflict had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer fighting my parents. The anger I had felt in Victor Gable's office had dissolved. There was no victory in defeating an enemy who had already destroyed themselves. I was just watching them drown. They had built a vessel of lies to carry their golden child across a sea of debt. The vessel was taking on water, and they had thrown their own life jackets overboard to keep her afloat. "You made your choices," I said. My voice was as cold and precise as a scalpel. "You chose her comfort over my safety. You chose her facade over your own retirement. You are not losing your house because of me. You are losing your house because you handed Lauren the matches and let her burn your life to the ground." I turned around and walked toward the entrance of my apartment building. My mother called my name. It was a terrible, jagged sound. I did not stop walking. I did not look back. I opened the glass door to the lobby and let it click shut behind me. I went up to my apartment. I locked the deadbolt. I placed my purse on the counter. The interaction had yielded a crucial piece of new intelligence. My parents were entirely bankrupt. Their accounts were empty. Their retirement was gone. If my parents were broke, the $40,000 loan from 4 years ago could not have been unsecured. A bank does not approve a large line of credit for a young lab manager with no collateral, especially when the guarantors have a depleted net worth. There was a missing piece of the puzzle. The bank required an asset to back that loan. I needed to call Victor Gable in the morning. I needed to find out exactly what my family had offered the bank to guarantee the theft. The betrayal was not over. It was merely waiting in the archives. I called Victor Gable the morning after the confrontation in the parking lot. I did not need to wait long for a response. His assistant scheduled me for an emergency meeting at 1 o'clock that same afternoon. When I arrived, his office felt different. The quiet was usually measured and professional. Today, the quiet felt heavy. It felt like the air in a room where bad news has already been delivered to the furniture and is just waiting for the client to sit down. Victor was standing by the window looking down at the street. He turned around when I entered. He did not ask how I was doing. He walked back to his desk and sat down. He placed his hands flat on the polished wood. "The fraud department at the originating bank released their preliminary findings to my office this morning," he said. Detective Russo also received a copy. I took the leather chair across from him. "What did they find?" I asked. Victor opened a manila folder. It was thicker than the one he had shown me previously. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it face down on the blotter. "When we initially reviewed the promissory note, we assumed the $40,000 was an unsecured personal line of credit," he began. "Unsecured loans are based entirely on the borrower's credit score and income history. But as you suspected, the math did not align. Your sister had terrible credit. Your parents were severely over-leveraged. The bank algorithm would never have approved a $40,000 unsecured line, even with 2 guarantors." He tapped the back of the face-down paper. "The bank required collateral," he stated. "They required a tangible asset to back the loan. If the debt defaulted, the bank needed a legal mechanism to recoup their loss." I thought about my parents' house in Orange County. They had drained their savings to pay Lauren's mortgages. They were broke. But they still had the house. "Did they use their equity?" I asked. Victor shook his head. "No. Their property was already encumbered. They had no equity left to pledge." He flipped the paper over and slid it across the desk toward me. "This is what they used," he said. I looked down at the document. It was a printed copy of a property deed. My maternal grandmother had passed away 7 years ago. She had been a quiet woman who lived a frugal life in a small town. When she died, she left a modest estate. The bulk of it went to my mother. But my grandmother had specifically set aside one asset for me. It was a small parcel of undeveloped land in Northern California. 3 acres of pine trees and rocky soil near the Oregon border. It was not worth a fortune. Its appraised value was roughly $60,000. It was the only inheritance I had ever received. I had never visited the parcel. I simply kept the deed in a safety deposit box, intending to build a small cabin there one day. I read the text on the page Victor had handed me. It was a deed of trust. It legally pledged the 3 acres in Northern California as collateral for the $40,000 line of credit. The name on the property title was mine. The signature at the bottom of the deed transfer was mine. I stared at the ink. This signature was not forged. It did not have Lauren's extravagant loops, it had my sharp angles, it was my authentic handwriting. How did they get my signature on this? I asked. My voice sounded hollow. I never signed a deed transfer. I never pledged this land. Victor pointed to the date printed next to my signature. October 10th. 4 years ago. October 10th. 2 days before the loan was originated. 2 days before Lauren forged my name on the promissory note. The timeline clicked into place with devastating precision. October 10th was a Sunday. It was the day I was discharged from the hospital after my emergency gallbladder surgery. I had been driven to my parents' house in Orange County to recover. I was in intense pain. I was heavily medicated. I closed my eyes and let the memory surface. I remembered lying in my childhood bed. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn. My mother, Patricia, had walked into the room carrying a tray with a glass of water and my prescribed pain medication. She had handed me the pills. I had swallowed them. Then she had pulled a clipboard from behind her back. She had told me it was hospital paperwork. She had said it was an insurance form that required my signature to finalize the billing for the emergency surgery. She had said she needed to mail it back to the hospital immediately so the claim would not be denied. I had been groggy. My vision was blurred from the narcotics. I had trusted my mother. She was standing next to my bed taking care of me. I had taken the pen she offered. I had signed the paper on the clipboard without reading it. I opened my eyes and looked at Victor. She brought it to me while I was in bed, I said. My voice was no longer hollow, it was cold. She told me it was an insurance form for the surgery. I signed it because she told me to. Victor did not flinch. He absorbed the information and categorized it legally. That is fraud in the factum, he explained. It occurs when a person is deceived into signing a document without understanding its true nature or consequences. It is a severe criminal offense. I looked back down at the deed. The betrayal had reached rock bottom. The theft was not an opportunistic crime committed in a moment of panic. It was premeditated. They had orchestrated the timeline. My parents and my sister had realized they needed collateral to secure the loan. They knew I owned the land in Northern California. They knew my surgery provided a perfect window of vulnerability. They had drafted the deed transfer in advance. My mother had waited until I was under the influence of narcotic painkillers. She had walked into my bedroom and lied to my face to steal the only inheritance my grandmother had left me. Once they secured my authentic signature on the property deed, they had the collateral. 2 days later, Lauren forged my name on the promissory note. My parents co-signed it. They submitted the entire package to the bank. They had not just stolen my credit score. They had legally encumbered my land. What happens to the property now? I asked. Victor folded his hands on the desk. The loan is 90 days past due. The bank has initiated the preliminary stages of foreclosure on the collateral. If the fraud investigation does not clear your name, the bank will seize the 3 acres in Northern California to recoup their $40,000 loss. You will lose the land. I sat in the leather chair and let the final fragments of my familial attachment dissolve. There is a specific kind of clarity that arrives when you realize the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones holding the knife. You stop wondering why they did it. You stop hoping for an apology. The emotional noise stops. You are left with pure, unadulterated resolve. I looked at Victor Gable. His eyes were steady. He was waiting for my instruction. I am not losing my grandmother's land, I stated. Victor nodded. Detective Russo is preparing the arrest warrants based on the wire fraud and the forged promissory note. But this new development changes the scope of the investigation. The fraudulent acquisition of real estate escalates the severity of the charges. The district attorney will now view this as a coordinated criminal enterprise. He leaned forward slightly. The bank's legal department will fight us. They possess a document with your authentic signature. Proving fraud in the factum requires establishing your medical incapacitation on October 10th. We have your hospital discharge records, but the defense will argue you were lucid enough to sign. They will try to enforce the lien, I concluded. Yes, Victor said. The bank wants their money. They do not care about your family dynamics. They only care about the collateral. Then we need to dismantle their defense, I replied. I want subpoenas issued for the notary public who stamped this deed. A deed transfer requires a notarized signature. I was in bed. No notary was present in my bedroom. Someone falsified the notary stamp. Victor's eyes narrowed in professional appreciation. You are correct. The notary block is the weak point. I will file the subpoena today. I stood up. The meeting was over. I had my objective. I walked out of the office and down to the street. The San Diego sun was bright and uncompromising. I got into my car. The engine turned over with a steady hum. My family had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had stolen my identity. They had drained their own retirement to protect a lie. Now I knew they had used my medical vulnerability to steal my inheritance. The quiet defensive phase of my strategy was complete. The quarantine had served its purpose. The active offensive phase was about to begin. Law enforcement was moving. The subpoenas were flying. The legal net was tightening around the house in Orange County. But the justice system is slow. It grinds forward in weeks and months. I knew my family. I knew they would not wait quietly for the police to arrive. Cornered animals do not wait. They attack. And the most dangerous animal in that house was not my sister. It was the man she had married. Derek was about to enter the battlefield. Detective Russo did not waste time. She operated with the precision of someone who understood that financial trails have a habit of disappearing if left unattended. 48 hours after the discovery of the forged deed transfer, 3 uniformed officers arrived at the house in Orange County. They did not knock politely and ask for a conversation. They served grand jury subpoenas to Thomas, Patricia, and Lauren simultaneously. The legal mechanism had officially engaged. The investigation was no longer a theoretical threat delivered over the phone. It was a physical document demanding their appearance under oath. I was at the hospital reviewing a complete blood count panel when Victor Gable called. He instructed me to check my personal email inbox. I stepped out of the lab and opened the mail app on my phone. There was a scanned PDF attachment waiting for me. The family had hired a defense attorney. His name was Arthur Vance. A quick search revealed he operated out of a high-rise in Irvine and built his reputation on aggressive posturing. He specialized in civil litigation and white-collar defense, relying heavily on intimidation tactics to force settlements before trials could begin. He attempted to deploy his standard playbook against me. The PDF was a formal cease and desist letter. It was 4 pages long. It was filled with bold type and capitalized threats. Vance alleged that I had given explicit verbal consent for the $40,000 line of credit 4 years ago. He claimed I was now weaponizing the police department to extort my parents due to a personal grievance. He demanded I retract the identity theft affidavit immediately or face a civil countersuit for defamation and malicious prosecution. I read the letter standing in the hospital corridor. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound sense of validation. The letter was loud. It was theatrical. It was the desperate noise of people who knew the facts were entirely against them. Victor had forwarded the email with a brief note attached. It read, I intercepted this directly from opposing counsel. Do not respond. I have already drafted our reply. I drove to Victor's office after my shift ended. I sat in the leather chair while he slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was his response to Arthur Vance. Victor's reply was not 4 pages long. It was exactly 1 paragraph. It stated that any further communication containing threats of civil litigation directed at a cooperating witness in an active felony investigation would be forwarded immediately to the district attorney as evidence of witness intimidation pursuant to California Penal Code Section 136.1. It concluded by advising Mr. Vance to direct all future correspondence to the Financial Crimes Division. It was a masterclass in jurisdictional dominance. Vance was trying to fight a civil war. Victor reminded him they were already in criminal territory. The contrast between the opposing attorney's bluster and Victor's icy competence highlighted the thematic core of the entire conflict. Noise is useless against an airtight paper trail. A week later, the legal process demanded my physical participation. I was required to give a formal deposition. This was not a criminal trial yet. It was an evidentiary hearing mandated by the bank to officially finalize their fraud findings before releasing the lien on my Northern California property. The deposition took place in a neutral conference room on the 10th floor of a generic corporate building downtown. The room was sterile. It smelled of bleached carpet and stale coffee. There was a long rectangular table made of heavy mahogany. Victor and I arrived 15 minutes early. I wore a plain gray suit. I brought a single manila folder containing my medical records. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. Arthur Vance walked in first carrying a thick leather briefcase. He was followed by my father Thomas. My mother Patricia entered next, looking down at her hands. My sister Lauren walked in last. They took their seats on the opposite side of the mahogany table. My parents looked exhausted. Their faces were drawn and pale. They did not make eye contact with me. Lauren, however, stared directly at me. Her expression was devoid of the panic she had displayed in the hospital corridor. It had hardened into pure, concentrated hatred. She looked at me the way a person looks at an uncooperative machine that refuses to function. A court reporter sat at the head of the table adjusting a small stenography machine. The bank had sent their own legal representative, a young man who sat quietly in the corner taking notes. Arthur Vance opened his briefcase. He pulled out the original promissory note and the deed transfer. He pushed them across the polished wood until they rested in the center of the table. Vance initiated the questioning. He spoke with a booming theatrical cadence designed to fill the room and command authority. He asked me to state my name and address for the record. I did. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Ms.," he said, "please direct your attention to the promissory note located in front of you. Can you verify that the signature on the primary borrower line belongs to you?" I looked at the blue ink. I looked at the wide, extravagant slope of the first letter. "No," I said. My voice was calm and level. Vance frowned. "You deny that is your signature." "I deny it," I replied. He shifted his focus to the second document. "Please look at the deed of trust. Can you verify that the signature transferring your Northern California property as collateral is yours?" I looked at the black ink. I recognized my sharp angles. "That is my signature," I stated. Vance smiled a tight, victorious smile. He believed he had caught me in a contradiction. "So you admit to signing the collateral agreement securing the loan. This implies consent for the entire transaction, does it not?" Victor remained perfectly still beside me. He did not object. He let Vance step fully into the trap. I reached into my manila folder. I pulled out a certified hospital discharge summary. I laid it next to the deed. "I signed that document on Sunday, October 10th, I explained. My tone was clinical. I was discharged from the hospital on that exact date following emergency gallbladder removal. I was prescribed a heavy regimen of narcotic painkillers. I was driven to the house in Orange County by my parents. I paused and looked directly at my mother. Patricia flinched visibly. While I was lying in bed incapacitated by the medication, I continued. My mother brought me a clipboard. She told me it was an insurance form required by the hospital billing department. She instructed me to sign it immediately so my medical claim would not be denied. I trusted her. I signed the paper she handed me. I did not consent to a deed transfer. I was coerced under false pretenses while medically impaired. Vance's smile vanished. He glanced at my mother. Patricia was staring at the table, her face drained of all color. 2 days later, I said, pointing to the blue ink on the promissory note, my sister forged my name on the loan application. I was still recovering in the spare bedroom. The timeline is documented by the surgical records. The silence in the conference room was absolute. The mechanical clicking of the court reporter's keys was the only sound. Vance scrambled to recover his momentum. He pulled a printed email exchange from his briefcase. He held it up. "Ms.," he challenged, "we have correspondence indicating you were fully aware of your sister's financial difficulties during that time period. Is it not possible you verbally agreed to help her and simply forgot due to the medication?" I looked at Arthur Vance. I did not blink. "A verbal agreement does not authorize a forged signature," I countered. "Furthermore, my sister did not use the $40,000 to stabilize a failing business." She used it to lease a luxury SUV and book a vacation to Maui. The funds were completely drained in 3 weeks. Lauren lunged forward in her chair. The veneer of hatred shattered, replaced by a sudden explosive rage. "You are a liar," she spat. Arthur Vance grabbed her arm and pulled her back into her seat. "Be quiet," he hissed. I maintained eye contact with my sister. I was completely unfazed by the outburst. The foundation was holding perfectly firm. The defense crumbled in real time. Vance's strategy relied on intimidation and ambiguity. He needed me to hesitate or contradict myself. He needed me to show emotional vulnerability that he could exploit. I gave him nothing but hard, unyielding facts. I laid out the medical timeline, the forged handwriting, and the specific pattern of deception used to steal my land. The bank representative in the corner stopped taking notes. He closed his laptop. He had heard enough. The burden of proof for fraud in the factum had been met. The bank could not legally enforce a lien obtained through documented deception and medical coercion. The deposition concluded 20 minutes later. Arthur Vance packed his briefcase with hurried, aggressive motions. He did not look at Victor. He ushered his clients out of the room. My parents walked out first, their heads bowed. Lauren walked out last. She stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. It was a long, terrible look. It was the realization that the sister she had used as a stepping stone her entire life had just removed the ground beneath her feet. Victor and I rode the elevator down to the lobby in silence. The civil dispute over the collateral was effectively over. The bank would release the lien on my property, but the victory felt entirely procedural. The criminal consequences were still pending. The district attorney had the file. Lauren was facing felony charges. My parents were facing conspiracy charges. I believed the scope of the destruction was fully mapped out. I believed I understood the exact parameters of the theft. I was wrong. The rot ran much deeper than a single $40,000 loan. The Golden Child had not just destroyed my credit. She had been systematically dismantling the entire family architecture for years, and the detective was about to show me the full blueprint. The civil deposition concluded the bank's involvement with my Northern California property. The lien was removed. My credit file was officially sanitized. The underwriting department reinstated my mortgage application for the condo in Hillcrest. I had secured my foundation. But the criminal justice system operates on an entirely separate track. The bank only cared about reclaiming their funds and clearing their ledger. The state of California and the federal government cared about wire fraud. A forged promissory note transferred across state banking lines is a federal offense. It carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. When you are looking at 2 decades of incarceration, the rules of family loyalty evaporate. An alliance built on a foundation of enabling will always fracture under the weight of a federal indictment. I learned how quickly that fracture occurred on a Thursday morning. I was in the lab running a routine complete blood count. The centrifuge was spinning with its familiar high-pitched hum. My phone vibrated in the breast pocket of my white coat. I looked at the screen. It was Detective Russo. I stepped into the empty supply closet and answered the call. Russo did not exchange pleasantries. She spoke with the crisp efficiency of an investigator who had just received a break in the case. "Your sister formally changed her defense strategy this morning," Russo said. Her attorney contacted the district attorney to broker a proffer agreement. I leaned against the metal shelving unit. I asked her what a proffer agreement meant. "It means she is offering to cooperate in exchange for leniency," Russo explained. "When a suspect realizes the physical evidence against them is airtight, they look for a way to reduce their sentence. They look for someone else to hand to the prosecutor." Lauren submitted a sworn statement today regarding the origination of the $40,000 loan. I asked who she was handing to the prosecutor. "Your parents," Russo replied. I stood very still in the supply closet. The scent of rubbing alcohol suddenly felt very sharp in my lungs. Russo detailed the contents of the sworn statement. The document was a masterpiece of legal self-preservation. Lauren did not deny that the signature on the promissory note was forged. The forensic evidence made denial impossible. Instead, she denied knowing it was forged at the time. In her official affidavit, Lauren claimed she was experiencing severe financial distress 4 years ago. She stated she went to her parents in tears begging for a solution to save her home. According to her sworn testimony, my father Thomas and my mother Patricia told her not to worry. They told her they would handle it. A week later, Lauren alleged my parents presented her with the loan paperwork. They told her that I had willingly agreed to sign the documents to help her out of a tight spot. Lauren claimed she simply signed her own name on the primary borrower line, trusting that her parents had secured my legitimate consent for the rest. She is claiming she was a naive beneficiary, Russo said. Her official stance is that your parents orchestrated the entire scheme. She alleges your mother secured the property deed under false pretenses, and your father forged your name on the promissory note before handing it to her to sign. She is painting them as the masterminds of the fraud. I processed the geometry of my sister's lie. It was breathtaking in its cruelty. Lauren was the golden child. She had spent 34 years being shielded from the consequences of her own actions. Whenever she broke a rule, my parents rushed in to pay the fine. Whenever she failed, they altered the narrative to make it look like a success. They had taught her that she was too important to suffer. Now she was applying that exact lesson to a federal felony. She genuinely believed her parents should go to prison in her place. She viewed them the same way she viewed my credit score. They were simply resources to be expended for her survival. She had thrown her enablers directly into the gears of the criminal justice system to buy herself a plea deal. Russo informed me that the district attorney was reviewing the statement. The prosecutor knew Lauren was lying about the mechanics of the forgery, but her willingness to testify against her co-conspirators gave them immense leverage. I thanked Detective Russo for the update. I ended the call. I walked back out into the lab. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I felt a cold clinical validation. I had known the rot was deep, but I had not realized it was terminal. The quarantine I had placed on my phone was still active. I had blocked their numbers weeks ago. I did not want to hear their voices. But the universe has a way of forcing a conversation when the narrative requires closure. That evening, I was at my apartment unpacking a box of glassware for the new condo. My phone rang on the kitchen counter. The caller ID displayed an unrecognized local number. I assumed it was the moving company confirming my weekend reservation. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered the call. "Hello," I said. "Ava." The voice on the other end was a ragged, desperate whisper. It was my mother. She had bypassed the block by using a prepaid phone or a borrowed device. I stood in my kitchen holding a water glass in my left hand. I did not hang up. I let the silence hold the space. "Ava, please do not hang up," she sobbed. The sound of her crying was entirely different from the performative weeping she had deployed in her kitchen. This was the sound of a worldview collapsing. It was the sound of a woman realizing the floor she had stood on her entire life was actually a trapdoor. "Arthur Vance called your father an hour ago," she managed to say between gasping breaths. "He dropped us as clients. He said a conflict of interest had arisen. He told us what Lauren did." She paused, waiting for me to express shock. I expressed nothing. "She signed a paper, Ava," my mother cried. Her voice cracked, climbing to a panicked pitch. "She told the prosecutor it was our idea. She told them your father forged your signature. She told them I tricked you into signing the deed. She is testifying against us to save herself." I listened to the devastation pouring out of the receiver. Patricia was experiencing the exact betrayal I had experienced in Victor Gable's office. She was finally reading the receipt. "She lied to the police," my mother wailed. "We did everything for her. We gave her everything we had. We ruined our relationship with you just to keep her safe." And she handed us to the district attorney. "They are going to arrest your father, Ava. They are going to put us in jail." She wanted me to save her. She wanted the foundation to absorb the weather one last time. She was calling the daughter she had sacrificed, hoping that daughter would somehow step in and shield her from the daughter she had worshipped. I looked at the water glass in my hand. The glass was clear and perfectly clean. I did not offer her a life raft. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, absolute certainty of a pathologist declaring a time of death. You protected her from the truth for 30 years, I said. Now you get to live in it. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear her screaming my name through the small speaker. I pressed the red button and disconnected the call. I opened the contact settings and blocked the new number. I set the phone down on the counter. I went back to unpacking my boxes. I believed the story was reaching its natural conclusion. Lauren had severed her alliance with our parents. The district attorney had the confessions they needed to proceed with the indictments. The criminal machinery was in motion, and it would grind them down at its own pace. I thought the $40,000 loan and the stolen property deed were the extent of the damage. I thought I understood the exact dimensions of the financial wreckage. But I was evaluating the destruction through the lens of my own stolen assets. I had not yet seen what Lauren had done to the people who enabled her. 2 days later, Detective Russo requested an urgent meeting. She asked me to bring Victor Gable. She said the forensic accountants had finished their deep dive into Lauren's offshore banking history and the joint accounts belonging to my parents. The $40,000 loan was not the primary theft. It was just the final desperate bridge loan taken out when the real money finally ran dry. Lauren had not merely ruined our parents, she had systematically hollowed them out, and Detective Russo was about to lay the blueprint of their absolute annihilation on the table. I arrived at Victor Gable's office on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky over San Diego was overcast, casting a flat gray light through the tall windows of his suite. I had taken an early lunch break from the hospital. Detective Russo had called me 2 hours prior. She did not provide details over the phone. She simply stated that the forensic audit of my sister's offshore and domestic accounts was complete, and I needed to view the results in person. I walked into the room. Victor was seated behind his desk. Detective Russo was standing next to a large rectangular conference table situated in the corner of his office. The table was usually bare. Today it was covered by a sprawling sheet of plotter paper. It looked like an architectural blueprint. I approached the table. Russo did not offer a greeting. She pointed to the paper. "This is the financial anatomy of your family," she said. I looked down at the document. It was a flowchart. At the very top was a black box containing the names of my parents, Thomas and Patricia. Below that box, a cascading network of red lines branched out, moving downward across the page. Each red line connected to a different banking institution, a different routing number, and a different holding company. The red lines were numerous. They tangled and crossed over one another, resembling the root system of a diseased tree. At the very bottom of the page, all the red lines converged into a single black box. The name inside that box was Lauren. I traced the path of the ink. The $40,000 line of credit drawn against my Social Security number was documented on the far right side of the paper. It looked insignificant compared to the rest of the diagram. It was just one small tributary feeding into a much larger river of stolen money. Russo placed her index finger on the top box. "When we subpoenaed the joint checking accounts belonging to your parents, we noticed a discrepancy in their home equity," she began. "We had to dig back further than the 4-year statute on your identity theft claim. We went back 5 years. I thought about the timeline. 5 years ago, I was a junior lab technician. My father had just retired from his corporate management position. He had always prided himself on controlling his own finances. He kept meticulous paper records in a metal filing cabinet in his home office. But 5 years ago, my father required surgery to remove cataracts in both of his eyes. His vision was severely compromised for several months during his recovery. He could not drive. He could not read fine print. Lauren had stepped in to fill the void. She had volunteered to drive him to his appointments. She had offered to sort the household mail and balance the checkbook while his eyes healed. She had played the role of the dutiful, devoted daughter, taking the administrative burden off my mother's shoulders. Russo traced a red line down the paper. "During that 4-month window of visual impairment, your sister systematically dismantled their financial security," Russo explained. "She set up online banking portals for all of their accounts. She changed the delivery preferences from paper statements to digital delivery. She rerouted the notifications to an email address she controlled. She effectively blinded them to their own ledger. I stared at the chart. The calculation was chilling. Lauren had not just taken advantage of an opportunity, she had weaponized our father's physical vulnerability. Once she controlled the mail and the digital access, she started draining the equity in the Orange County house. Russo continued, "Your parents thought they were giving her small, manageable loans to help her real estate business. Lauren would bring them signature pages folded in half. She would point to the bottom line and rush them, claiming she had to leave to pick up her children from school." Russo paused and let her hand rest flat on the blueprint. They thought they were signing authorizations for $5,000 personal loans. In reality, she was having them sign the origination documents for home equity lines of credit. Over the course of 3 years, she took out 3 separate reverse mortgages against their property. I looked at the numbers printed next to the red lines. The first draw was $80,000. The second draw was $120,000. The third draw was $150,000. The math was absolute. Lauren had quietly siphoned $350,000 out of the foundation of our parents' lives. She intercepted the mortgage statements at the post office before your parents ever saw them, Russo stated. She used a fraction of the stolen money to make the minimum monthly interest payments, keeping the accounts in good standing so the bank would not call the house. She skimmed the rest to fund her lifestyle. I stood in the quiet office and looked at the blueprint of total financial annihilation. The story had fundamentally pivoted. The conflict was no longer about a stolen credit score or a forged promissory note. It was about the complete eradication of my family by the sister they adored. The pieces of the past 4 years suddenly snapped together, forming a cohesive, terrifying picture. I finally understood the mechanics of the $40,000 loan in my name. The line of credit forged during my gallbladder surgery was never the primary theft. It was a bridge loan. It was a desperate final measure. 4 years ago, Lauren had gone back to the well one more time. She had tried to pull more equity from the Orange County house. But the well was dry. The bank algorithm had rejected the application because the house was leveraged to its absolute limit. My parents were effectively broke, and they did not even know it. Lauren was out of capital. Derek was demanding to know why her supposed real estate commissions were not hitting their joint account. She needed cash immediately to maintain the illusion of her success. So she turned to the only untapped resource left in the family. She turned to the quiet sister with the spotless credit history. She convinced my parents to co-sign the forgery by claiming it was a temporary fix to save her marriage. My parents had agreed because they believed they still possessed a robust retirement portfolio to fall back on. They believed they were throwing her a small life preserver. They did not realize she had already sunk their ship. I looked at Victor Gable. He had been standing silently by the window, allowing the investigator to present the facts. "My parents are bankrupt," I said. It was not a question. Victor nodded. "Their net worth is gone, Ava. The Orange County property is underwater. When the fraud investigation freezes Lauren's accounts, the minimum payments on those reverse mortgages will stop. The bank will foreclose on their home within a matter of months." I felt a strange, profound stillness settle over my mind. For 30 years, my parents had curated a narrative where Lauren was the brilliant, ambitious star, and I was the reliable background character. They had poured all their emotional and financial resources into cultivating her success. They had willingly sacrificed my inheritance and my credit score to protect her from the consequences of her own choices. They had built a golden child, and the golden child had eaten them alive. "What happens now?" I asked, looking back at Detective Russo. "The district attorney is drafting the indictments," Russo replied. "Lauren is facing multiple counts of federal wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and identity theft. Her proffer agreement is worthless. The prosecutor knows she lied in her sworn statement about your parents masterminding the scheme. The digital footprints trace back entirely to her devices." Russo rolled up the large sheet of plotter paper. "Your parents will not face conspiracy charges for your forged loan," she added. "The district attorney views them as victims of elder abuse regarding the reverse mortgages. Their complicity in your forgery is being overshadowed by the sheer scale of what was done to them. The state is preparing to arrest your sister by the end of the week. I watched Russo slide the blueprint into a cardboard tube. The criminal justice system was about to intervene. The police would arrive at Lauren's house. They would place her in handcuffs. They would read her rights. But an arrest is a procedural event. It happens in the back of a patrol car. It happens in a booking room. I did not want the narrative to end in a sterile holding cell while my parents sat in their living room oblivious to their own ruin. My parents still believed they were fighting a civil dispute over $40,000. They still believed they had a home to live in. They still believed Lauren was just a little careless with money. They needed to read the receipt. They needed to see the blueprint. I turned to Victor Gable. "You told Arthur Vance to direct all future correspondence to your office," I said. Victor tilted his head, acknowledging the fact. "I did." He formally withdrew as their counsel, citing a conflict of interest after Lauren submitted her sworn statement. "Your parents and your brother-in-law are currently scrambling to retain new representation. Call them," I instructed. "Do not tell them about the indictments. Do not tell them about the elder abuse investigation. Tell them we are willing to hold a final settlement conference to discuss the civil damages regarding my property lien." Victor's eyes locked onto mine. He understood the architecture of the trap immediately. "Tell them to come to your office on Friday morning," I continued. "Tell them they must all be present. My parents, Lauren, Derek. Tell them it is their last opportunity to negotiate a repayment plan before we proceed to civil trial." Victor reached for his silver pen. He pulled a legal pad across the desk. "They will come," he said quietly. "They are desperate for a way out. They will walk into this room expecting to argue over a $40,000 debt." I looked at the empty mahogany conference table. "They are going to walk into an autopsy," I said. Victor Gable orchestrated the logistics of the meeting with the precision of a military tactician. He sent formal invitations to the new legal representatives my family had scrambled to retain. The premise was carefully constructed to appeal to their desperation. The invitation stated that we were willing to hold a final settlement conference to discuss the civil damages regarding the lien on my Northern California property. The bait was irresistible. The defense attorneys believed they were walking into a negotiation room to arrange a repayment schedule. My parents and my sister believed they could still throw enough money at the problem to make the criminal investigation disappear. They believed the conversation would center entirely around the $40,000. They did not know that Victor and I possessed the blueprint. The meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Friday. The large conference room in Victor's suite had been prepared. The heavy mahogany table was clear except for a stack of manila folders placed directly in front of the two empty chairs reserved for my parents. I arrived early. I took my seat at the far end of the table. I wore a structured black blazer and kept my hands folded in my lap. I did not review any notes. The facts were already etched into my memory. At 9:55, the door opened. The defense attorneys entered first, carrying briefcases and projecting forced professional optimism. They were followed by my family. My father, Thomas, walked in with a slow, shuffling gait. He looked 10 years older than the man who had confronted me in my apartment parking lot. The posture of the crisis manager had completely evaporated. My mother, Patricia, clutched her handbag against her chest. She avoided looking in my direction. Lauren entered last. She did not look panicked. She looked defensive. Her jaw was set. She took a seat next to her attorney, keeping a deliberate physical distance from our parents. The fracture in their alliance was visible in the way they arranged themselves around the table. Victor waited until everyone was seated. He remained standing. He did not offer opening remarks about finding common ground. He did not acknowledge the defense attorney's attempts to initiate small talk. He looked directly at my father. "Thomas," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the room, "we are not here today to negotiate a repayment plan for the $40,000 line of credit." The defense attorneys immediately stiffened. One of them leaned forward, preparing to object. Victor raised a hand, stopping the objection before it could vocalize. The $40,000 debt is no longer the primary issue, he continued. The district attorney has escalated the scope of their inquiry based on forensic accounting reports. We requested this meeting because the Financial Crimes Division asked us to share a specific piece of discovery with you. Victor reached out and placed his hand on the stack of manila folders sitting in front of my parents. He slid the top folder toward my father. He slid the second folder toward my mother. Open them, Victor instructed. Thomas looked at the folder with hesitant, trembling hands. He flipped the cover open. Patricia opened hers a second later. Inside the folders were high-resolution printed copies of Detective Russo's financial flowcharts. The documents detailed the 3 separate home equity lines of credit. They highlighted the intercepted electronic statements. They clearly displayed the routing numbers funneling $350,000 directly from my parents' property into Lauren's personal checking account. I sat at the head of the table and watched my parents process the data. The realization did not happen instantly. It took several seconds for their minds to translate the red lines and the bold numbers into a coherent reality. My father's eyes scanned the top page. He looked at the total withdrawn equity. He looked at the current balance on his mortgage. Then he looked at the foreclosure warning notices that had been hidden in a digital inbox for months. The color drained completely from his face, leaving behind an ashen gray pallor. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He stared at the paper as if it were a physical threat. Patricia let out a sound that I will never forget. It was not a cry. It was a sharp intake of breath, a sudden gasp of absolute terror. She dropped the folder onto the table. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Thomas," she whispered. "Thomas, the house." My father did not answer her. He could not speak. He was staring at the geometric proof of his own ruin. The house in Orange County, the retirement portfolio, the decades of carefully managed savings. It was all gone. They were 120 days away from an eviction notice. The room descended into a suffocating, terrifying silence. The defense attorneys looked at the documents on the table and then looked at Lauren. Their professional optimism vanished, replaced by the stark realization that their client was not just a forger. She was an architect of systemic elder abuse. Lauren shifted in her chair. The defensive posture cracked under the weight of the silence. She tried to deploy her usual tactic of management. She tried to control the narrative before it completely crushed her. "Dad," she said, her voice pitching higher than normal. "It was an investment strategy. I was using the equity to leverage a commercial portfolio. The market shifted unexpectedly. I was going to pay it back. I promise." She reached across the table toward our father. Thomas slowly lifted his head. He looked at his eldest daughter. He did not look at her with anger. He looked at her with the blank, hollow expression of a man who has just been informed he is terminally ill. "You stole our house," he said. His voice was a flat, raspy whisper. "You took everything we had." "I didn't steal it," Lauren insisted, panic finally breaking through her veneer. "I was managing the accounts for you when your eyes were bad. You signed the authorizations. You gave me permission to handle the investments." Patricia slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table. The sudden noise echoed sharply in the room. "We signed authorizations for $5,000 loans," she screamed. The tears she shed now were not performative. They were tears of absolute, unmitigated devastation. "You told us you needed bridge money. You forged our digital signatures to hide the statements. You left us homeless, Lauren. You left us with nothing." The illusion of our family permanently disintegrated under the fluorescent lights. The carefully constructed facade of the golden child shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Lauren could not blame a shifting real estate market for the luxury car lease or the vacations to Maui. The paper evidence proved she had siphoned her parents' life savings to fund a shopping addiction. Lauren turned toward me. She pointed a trembling finger down the length of the table. "You did this!" she shouted, her voice venomous. "You brought these records here to destroy me." I sat perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a defense. I did not forge a promissory note, I said. I did not steal $350,000 from our parents. I am simply the one who turned on the light. Lauren opened her mouth to scream another accusation, but her attorney intervened. He firmly grabbed her arm and pulled her back into her seat. He recognized that every word she spoke in that room could be used against her in a federal indictment. The defense attorneys began packing their briefcases. They understood the settlement conference was over. There was nothing left to negotiate. The civil dispute over my property was irrelevant compared to the massive criminal liability sitting across the table. My parents remained frozen in their chairs. They were staring at the red lines on the flowcharts. They had sacrificed my financial security to protect a daughter who had already plotted their total destruction. They had thrown me overboard to lighten the load on a ship that Lauren had already torpedoed. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I looked down the length of the mahogany table at the three people who had comprised my family. There was no satisfaction in watching them break. There was no joy in the victory. There was only the cold clinical validation of a hypothesis proven correct. Victor remained standing by his desk. He did not usher them out. He let the silence enforce the reality of the situation. I walked toward the door. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer any final words of wisdom or forgiveness. I simply turned the handle and stepped out of the conference room. I believed the trap had fully closed. I believed the destruction was absolute. I believed there were no more layers left to uncover. But a cornered predator will always lash out with one final desperate strike. Lauren had lost her parents. She had lost her defense strategy. She was facing federal prison. But she still had one asset left to leverage. She still had the husband who required the illusion of wealth. And Derek was about to prove that he possessed a survival instinct far more ruthless than anyone anticipated. I stood in the hallway outside Victor Gable's conference room. I was ready to leave. I had delivered the blueprint. I had watched the foundation of my parents' willful ignorance crack and turn to dust. The operation was complete. But as I reached for the handle of the outer office door, it opened from the other side. A man stepped into the reception area. It was Derek. He was not wearing the casual, expensive weekend clothes he usually wore to Sunday dinners. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit. He was not alone. He was accompanied by a man holding a thick leather briefcase who moved with the distinct posture of a litigator. Derek stopped when he saw me. He did not look surprised. He looked through me. He looked like a man who was no longer interested in maintaining social pleasantries because the social structure had already been condemned. He gave me a single brief nod. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a shared perimeter. He walked past me and opened the door to the conference room. I turned around. The protocol of my exit had changed. I followed him back inside. The atmosphere in this room had barely begun to settle from the revelation of the home equity theft. My father, Thomas, was still staring at the flowcharts. My mother, Patricia, was holding her face in her hands. Lauren was glaring at her defense attorney, demanding he fix a situation that was fundamentally unfixable. When Derek walked in, the room went perfectly still. Lauren stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Derek," she said. Her voice caught in her throat. "What are you doing here?" Derek did not walk around the mahogany table to stand beside his wife. He stood at the opposite end next to the door. He placed his hands in his pockets. "I am here to protect my assets," he replied. His voice was devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a man conducting a hostile takeover. He gestured to the attorney standing next to him. "This is Mr. Sterling. He represents me." Lauren's defense attorney stood up. "Mr. Sterling," he said, adopting a cautious, professional tone. "This is a private settlement conference regarding civil damages. Your presence here is highly irregular." Sterling placed his briefcase on the table and opened the latches. "It is not irregular when the civil damages intersect with active federal indictments," he countered. "My client has a vested interest in separating his financial liability from his wife's criminal enterprise." Lauren gripped the edge of the table. "Derek, what are you talking about?" she demanded. Her panic was escalating rapidly. The walls were closing in and she could feel the air thinning. Derek looked at her. He looked at the woman he had been married to for 10 years. There was no affection in his eyes. There was only cold, hard calculation. 2 weeks ago, the bank froze our primary checking account, Derek said. You told me it was a clerical error regarding a tax hold. You told me you would handle it. You lied. Lauren opened her mouth to interrupt, but Derek raised his hand. I called the bank myself, he continued. The fraud department informed me that the account was frozen pursuant to a criminal investigation involving wire fraud. They informed me that my social security number was attached to a joint account currently under subpoena by the district attorney. He pulled a folder from his attorney's briefcase and tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud next to the flowcharts detailing my parents' ruin. You funneled stolen money into our joint accounts, Lauren, Derek stated. His voice was rising in volume, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. You took a forged $40,000 line of credit, and you deposited it directly into the account we used to pay our mortgage. You used stolen home equity to lease my car and book our vacations. You made me an unwitting accessory to a federal felony. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. Lauren's strategy of isolating the damage had failed. She had tried to contain the fire by managing the narrative, but she had built her entire life out of kindling. I didn't, Lauren cried out. Her voice was shrill. I was protecting us, Derek. I was keeping the lifestyle afloat while your commissions were delayed. I did it for our family. Derek laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You did not do it for our family, Lauren. You did it because you are a parasite. You could not admit that we were broke. You could not handle the humiliation of downsizing. So you cannibalized your own sister, and you bankrupted your parents. He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table. And then you tried to drag me down with you. Mr. Sterling stepped forward. He withdrew a thick document bound with a blue legal cover from his briefcase. My client refuses to accept criminal liability for his wife's actions, Sterling announced, addressing both Victor Gable and Lauren's defense attorney. Yesterday morning, we filed a formal petition for divorce in family court. Lauren staggered back. She bumped into her chair. Divorce, she whispered. Derek, you can't. We also filed an emergency ex parte motion for exclusive custody of the children. Sterling continued, ignoring her outburst. Given the impending federal indictments and the risk of flight, the judge granted the motion temporary standing. Patricia looked up from her hands. Her eyes were wide with horror. She was watching her golden child lose everything in the span of 30 minutes. First the parents, then the money, now the husband and the children. But Derek was not finished. The ultimate twist, the final devastating blow, was grounded entirely in legal reality. He had not just filed for divorce, he had sought immunity. To protect himself from conspiracy charges, my client proactively approached the district attorney, Sterling stated. We offered full cooperation in exchange for a non-prosecution agreement. We handed over all financial records within our possession. Sterling pointed to the folder Derek had thrown on the table. Including that, he added. Lauren stared at the folder. What is that? She asked, her voice trembling. Derek looked at her with absolute disgust. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the offshore transfers, Lauren? Did you think you were smart enough to hide money in the Cayman Islands without leaving a digital footprint on our shared router? The room went dead silent. Detective Russo had traced the domestic accounts. She had found the stolen home equity and the forged bridge loan, but she had not found the offshore accounts. Lauren had been skimming the stolen funds and funneling a portion into an international holding account. She was building an escape hatch. I found the login credentials hidden in your vanity, Derek said. I logged in. I downloaded the transaction history. I handed the entire ledger directly to Detective Russo yesterday afternoon. Lauren's legs gave out. She collapsed into her chair. The air left her lungs in a long, ragged exhale. She had tried to broker a proffer agreement by throwing our parents under the bus. She had tried to save herself by claiming she was a naive beneficiary of a family conspiracy. But her husband had beaten her to the prosecutor's office. Derek had secured the immunity deal by handing them the definitive proof of her premeditation. The offshore accounts proved she was the architect. She was not a victim. She was a predator who had built a financial sanctuary out of stolen bones. Her attorney closed his briefcase. The snap of the latches sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. We are done here, he said to Lauren. The district attorney will be upgrading your charges to include international money laundering. I strongly advise you to remain silent. Lauren sat in the chair staring blankly at the mahogany grain. Her entire life had collapsed in a single afternoon. Her husband had abandoned her. Her parents had realized she had bankrupted them. The state was upgrading her charges to guarantee decades in federal prison. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. Then my mother moved. Patricia slowly stood up. Her face was streaked with tears. She looked at her eldest daughter, the child she had sacrificed everything to protect. She looked at the woman who had stolen her home and her future. She turned away from Lauren. She looked down the length of the table at me. Avash whispered. It was a plea. It was the desperate, silent hope of a woman who had just realized her primary foundation had collapsed and was now desperately reaching for the secondary foundation she had ignored for 30 years. She wanted me to step in. She wanted me to fix it. She wanted the daughter she had thrown away to save her from the daughter she had kept. I looked at Patricia. I looked at Thomas sitting beside her, paralyzed by the magnitude of his own failure. They were victims now. Lauren had destroyed them, but they were not my victims, and they were not my responsibility. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I looked directly into my mother's eyes. You co-signed the forgery, I said. My voice was calm and even. You made your choice. I turned around. I walked out of the office. I did not look back. I left them in the ruins of their own favoritism. 8 months passed. I never saw my sister or my parents again after I walked out of the mahogany conference room. I did not need to see them. The truth had been established, and the machinery of the state required no further input from me. The justice system does not care about family dynamics. It operates on dockets and statutes and sentencing guidelines. Lauren did not go to trial. Trials are designed for defendants who possess a viable alternative narrative. Lauren possessed nothing but an offshore bank ledger and a terrified public defender. Her husband, Derek, had taken all the remaining marital assets, leaving her unable to afford private counsel. Faced with the reality of federal wire fraud and international money laundering charges, she chose the path of least resistance. She accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to multiple state-level felony counts of financial exploitation and identity theft. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in a state correctional facility. She did not receive a placement in a minimum security federal camp. She was assigned to a concrete building in the Central Valley. Her designer clothes and expensive perfumes were exchanged for standard-issue cotton uniforms. Her daily routine is now dictated by guards and institutional schedules. She has 5 years to sit in a small room and think about the true cost of a luxury lifestyle. Derek finalized his divorce within 4 months. He leveraged the criminal convictions to secure full physical and legal custody of their 2 children. He kept his leased SUV. He kept his pristine credit. He survived the collapse of his marriage by stepping directly on the back of his wife before she could drag him under the water. He continues to sell commercial real estate. He continues to wear heavy silver watches. The children are safe, but they are being raised by a man whose loyalty extends only as far as his own preservation. My parents faced a slower and much quieter kind of ruin. The bank holding the 3 reverse mortgages did not care that Thomas and Patricia were victims of elder financial abuse. Financial institutions do not grant pardons for trusting the wrong child. They only evaluate the balance sheet. The minimum interest payments ceased the day Lauren's accounts were frozen by the district attorney. The foreclosure process in California is methodical and unforgiving. The bank issued the notice of default. The mandatory waiting period expired. The notice of trustee sale was published. My parents were evicted from the house in Orange County. The custom kitchen with the 10-foot waterfall edge island belongs to a stranger now. The dining room where they once passed envelopes of stolen cash over dessert is occupied by another family. Thomas and Patricia moved into a cramped 1-bedroom rental apartment located in a dense complex next to a strip mall. I know this because Victor Gable forwarded me a copy of their final bankruptcy filings to close out my legal file. Their retirement portfolio is entirely gone. They have no savings. They rely exclusively on their monthly Social Security disbursements to purchase groceries and pay their utility bills. They spend their days living in the exact financial reality they tried so desperately to avoid. They sacrificed my future to save their golden child, and the golden child left them with nothing but cardboard boxes and a subsidized lease. My trajectory moved in the precise opposite direction. The identity theft protocols functioned exactly as Victor promised. The bank fraud department issued a formal clearance letter acknowledging the forged promissory note. The three major credit bureaus purged the defaulted line of credit from my history. It was erased as if it had never existed. My credit score returned to 780. I returned to the mortgage office just off the interstate. I sat in the same glass-walled room with the beige carpet. Diane, the loan officer, pulled up my file. She did not frown this time. She did not stop typing. The screen displayed a pristine record. I signed the final underwriting approval documents with my own pen. I closed on the condo in Hillcrest 30 days later. The space is exactly what I wanted. It has a south-facing window that lets the morning light spill across the hardwood floors. The walls are painted a clean, crisp white. I did not buy a quartz kitchen island. I purchased a modest butcher block table to serve as a prep station. It is sturdy and practical. It fits the room perfectly. I spent my first few weeks unpacking boxes and establishing my new routine. I go to the hospital. I process the blood samples. I look for anomalies under the microscope. I come home to a quiet apartment. I do not check my phone for emergency texts. I do not attend Sunday dinners where the air is thick with unspoken resentments. Yesterday afternoon, I drove home from the lab. I parked my car in my secure assigned space. I walked to the lobby and opened my brass mailbox. Among the utility bills and the grocery circulars, there was a single white envelope. The return address listed a location in Orange County. The handwriting on the front of the envelope was sharp and vertical. The capital letters resembled pitched roofs. The lowercase letters were narrow trenches. It was from my mother. It was the first piece of correspondence she had attempted to send me since the day in the law office. I held the envelope in my hand. It was light. It likely contained a card or a folded letter. I knew exactly what kind of words were written inside. There would be apologies designed to elicit pity. There would be updates about my father's declining health. There would be subtle requests for a phone call or a brief visit. She would attempt to rebuild the bridge she had burned because she was lonely in her cramped apartment and needed a new foundation to lean on. I walked into my condo. I closed the front door behind me and turned the deadbolt until it clicked. I walked into my home office. I purchased a heavy-duty paper shredder when I moved in to manage my laboratory documents and financial statements. It sits tucked neatly under my desk. I did not open the envelope. Opening the envelope requires participating in the narrative of the sender. It requires giving them access to your emotional bandwidth. I had no bandwidth left to give. My parents had made their choices 4 years ago while I was bleeding in their spare bedroom. I was making my choice now. I pressed the power button on the shredder. The machine hummed to life with a steady mechanical vibration. I fed the unopened envelope into the steel blades. The machine grabbed the thick paper, pulling it downward. I listened to the sharp grinding sound as the letter was reduced to thin, illegible strips of confetti. The process took less than 3 seconds. The sharp, vertical handwriting was gone. The apologies were destroyed before they could ever reach my eyes. I turned the machine off. The room returned to its natural, quiet state. I walked into my kitchen and stood by the butcher block island. I filled a glass vase with fresh water. I arranged a dozen yellow tulips I had purchased from the farmer's market earlier that morning. I adjusted the stems until they sat perfectly in the center of the glass. I stood in the afternoon light and looked around my home. There are no secrets hidden in these walls. There are no forged signatures sitting in the drawers. I paid for everything in this room with my own labor. I own the space entirely. The peace that settles over a person when they finally sever a toxic attachment is not loud. It is not a triumphant parade. It is a quiet, profound stillness. It is the absence of anxiety. It is the deep, unbreakable satisfaction of knowing that your perimeter is secure. I drank a glass of cold water. I listened to the hum of my refrigerator. I enjoyed the absolute unbreakable peace of a locked door and a clean slate. My name is Ava. I am 34 years old. I am the foundation. And the foundation is holding just fine. It has been 2 years since I dropped my mother's letter into the shredder. I have not received another one. The condo in Hillcrest is exactly what I wanted it to be. The kitchen cabinets are white. The south-facing window lets the morning light pool perfectly on the hardwood floors. I still work in the hematology lab. I still look for anomalies under the microscope. The only difference is that I no longer have to look for them in my own life. People often ask me how I survived the complete collapse of my family without losing my mind. They want a complicated answer. But the truth is not complicated. The truth is just a set of rules I learned by watching the people who were supposed to protect me dismantle my future for their own comfort. If you are listening to this, and you are the quiet foundation of your own family, there are 5 things I need you to understand. First, documentation will always defeat emotion. When the people you love decide to steal from you, they will use tears, guilt, and manufactured outrage to confuse the narrative. Do not argue with them. Let them cry. Then look at the bank statements, the timestamps, and the signatures. Paper does not panic, and paper is infinitely patient. Second, shared DNA is not a binding contract for abuse. We are taught that family is an absolute, that we must absorb every trespass because of blood. But loyalty that requires you to sacrifice your own financial and emotional survival is not loyalty. It is extortion. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to lock the door. Third, silence is the most effective tool you possess. Manipulators thrive on your reaction. They want you to scream so they can call you unstable. They want you to negotiate so they can find a compromise that benefits them. When you refuse to speak, you force them to sit in the vacuum of their own guilt. Give a liar enough silence and they will eventually hand you the evidence you need. Fourth, enabling a predator always destroys the enabler. My parents thought they were saving my sister by funding her illusions. They thought they could control the fire by feeding it my credit score. But a fire has no loyalty. It will consume the kindling and then it will consume the house. You cannot shield people from the consequences of their own choices without becoming collateral damage yourself. Finally, true peace is not found in apologies or reconciliation. For a long time, I thought I needed my family to admit they were wrong in order to heal. But the closure did not come from a confession in a conference room. It came from the realization that I no longer needed their participation in my life. Peace is an impenetrable boundary. It is the quiet hum of a paper shredder. It is a clean slate. I do not know what my sister is doing in the state facility. I do not know how my parents spend their days in their cramped apartment. I do not wonder about it. A foundation only holds the structure it is attached to. When you remove the house, the concrete does not crack. It simply remains steady in the earth. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever been the quiet one expected to carry the weight of someone else's weather, leave a comment below. Tell me the boundary you finally decided to draw. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more stories about people who stopped screaming and started documenting, make sure to subscribe to Hazel Tells Stories. I will be here waiting to tell you the next one.